Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it.
Anything could be going on in the world, but passions were simmering in businessman John's mansion. And why the hell take responsibility for a child if you can't take care of it? Muttered a young woman with a pretty but unkind face. She was packing an 8-year-old girl for school, and you couldn't tell from her face that she was enjoying the process. Accidentally, or maybe on purpose, Selena pulled a strand of her hair in a dragon braid. "Careful," the girl asked, not very politely. Selena only rolled her eyes, and the elderly, half-paralyzed man lying on the bed sighed heavily. That sigh only added fuel to the fire, and the woman continued to rant. "Do you think I need this? No, you don't. You take care of her yourself, or you'll be lying in a state. And I have to run around you." "Selena, I understand," John said quietly, "but the girl needs a mother's affection, and I can barely walk." The old man sighed again. There was so much sadness and hopelessness in that sigh that it seemed that a stone would shake, but not Celine's heart, if she had one, of course. Selena was the second daughter-in-law of John, a well-known businessman in town, and the wife, or rather, now widow, of his son Jacob, his son's first wife. Anna was a kind, calm, friendly woman. John did not remember Anna being in a bad mood. She was a housekeeper, but she was by no means a typical kitchen cleaner in a greasy bathrobe and a nest on her head. The house was in exemplary order, and there was always hot food. Anna looked as if she had stepped out of a housewares advertisement. Anna died in childbirth. The inconsolable widower didn't want to live, but he still had little Julia. That's who was worth living for. The young father took care of his daughter as best he could, but John said from time to time, "You should meet a nice woman. Julia needs a mother. She's a girl. And boys don't need a mother." Jacob grinned sadly. "Boys need a mother too," he agreed, "but girls need a mother more." Jacob realized that too, but it wasn't easy to find a woman willing to take care of someone else's child, and yet there was one. Selena was nothing like Anna, but she was undoubtedly beautiful too. But unlike Jacob's first wife, she wasn't a very good housekeeper, and her temper wasn't very good. And that was putting it mildly. If Anna could enjoy any little thing, Selena, on the contrary, was always dissatisfied. Jacob and Selena were in the same class, and they liked each other during their school years. After high school, as it usually happens, their paths diverged, but it so happened that fate brought them together again. One day, after negotiations in a business hotel, Jacob decided to have lunch at his favorite restaurant, which was located on the basement floor. The young entrepreneur entered the restaurant, and the first thing that caught his eye was a luxurious waterfall of silky golden blonde hair. A few seconds later, Jacob saw the face of his owner. "Selenka," he exclaimed, seeing his high school sweetheart. "What a reunion." "Jacob." Selena smiled, gracefully holding out her hand to him. "How many years, how many winters?" "Many, Selena, many. You look great. What are you doing here?" "This is my friend's restaurant. She invited me here. She should be here any minute. And let me guess, you were at the negotiation." "You're not psychic, are you?" Jacob laughed. Selena said, smiling, "It's really quite simple. All the businessmen of the city come here after business negotiations. Well, as for you, Billy Smirnov told me that you're in business, so it's not hard to make the comparison." "Well, yes," he nodded and, obeying a sudden impulse, suggested, "Celine, why don't I see you sometime? How about dinner at a restaurant?" "What an idiot," he chided himself. "Who told you she was single? Such a beauty." However, Selena agreed to meet, and the former classmates exchanged phone numbers. They met a couple days later, and when Jacob told Selena about his widowhood, the ex-lover just shook her head. "Poor you, I can only imagine what you've been through. I'm divorced." Jacob asked his ex to dance, and Selena laughed softly. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing's wrong," she smiled. "I just remembered when you asked me to dance in the 10th grade and kicked me in the legs." Jacob couldn't take it anymore and laughed. "I've been dancing ever since, thank God. I've noticed. You're a really good dancer." Well, it's the position, isn't it? That dinner was the beginning of their relationship, which eventually turned into a legal marriage. Selena, though faithfully attending to Julia, kept the little girl at a distance. At first, the girl had been drawn to her, but the young woman was determined not to allow any callow tenderness. Jacob was offended by this, but deep down he knew that it was impossible to make someone else's child love him. Not every man was capable of it anyway, so Jacob was grateful to Selena for taking care of his princess as best she could. A year after the wedding, Jacob died in a car accident. He bequeathed all his assets to Julia. In the event of his death before the adulthood of his daughter, Jacob's property was to be managed by Selena, who he appointed as Julia's guardian. This arrangement suited the young widow just fine. She stayed in John's house and represented the interests of the orphan girl. Selena was confused only one thing. When her stepdaughter turned 18, all the worldly goods would pass to her. Selena had been smart enough not to show her dislike for her stepdaughter when Jacob was alive. But after Jacob's death, she didn't bother. Selena often called Julia a spooner. The stepmother's lack of love was compensated for by John's love. But Selena was ready to glare at the little girl as soon as the old man turned his back. In time, Julia began to respond to the evil stepmother in the same way. But thick-skinned Selena did not care. So what a malicious little brat. John adored his granddaughter, such a little one, and she's already been through so much, the old man thought, and his heart burst with pity, first her mother, then her father. And this snake hisses at her, thinking that I do not notice anything. John spoiled Julia in every way he could. He took her to the park, children's caves, shopping, and entertainment centers, and did it with great pleasure. But unfortunately, a few months ago, John had a car accident, as a result of which he almost lost the ability to walk normally and became ill. After the old man was discharged from the hospital, Julia spent almost all the time in his room. In fact, everything is not so hopeless, assured the doctor. Your body will recover. But given your age, it will take time. I can't rule out the possibility of surgical intervention. All in all, it's not that bad. But what kind of treatment can we talk about when the daughter-in-law was eating Julia with a hateful look? Leaving the girl alone with Selena would be pure madness. Who knows what her sister-in-law might think? John, despite his unenviable position, ran the business by phone and internet. All issues requiring the direct presence of the head, the businessman entrusted the manager Harry, who, by the way, readily joined the case. John was not left with the feeling that he had been waiting for this moment. When Jacob's death was only a few months old, Julia didn't quite understand what had happened. She waited every day for her daddy to come back. But daddy never came back, and Julia grew up and realized that it would never happen. Selena, why don't you like Julia so much? John asked me one day. Why does she always stick her nose where it doesn't belong? Selena grumbled and suddenly stopped talking. The older man raised his eyebrows in surprise, but said nothing. He understood. The reason for dislike for the girl money, which daughter-in-law can dispose of only for the time being. But there was something else. Julia couldn't do math, and she always came home from school dissatisfied. Betty said I was useless, her granddaughter complained. John frowned. Telling a child that she is useless is uneducational, to say the least. By the way, the daughter-in-law worked as an accountant and, according to her, received a diploma with honors. So, maybe? Oh, no, please. Selena waved her hands. Well, what kind of math teacher am I? I've already forgotten everything. Well, you'll remember at the same time. And I need it, thought the daughter-in-law. She was not at all smiling to do math with her 8-year-old stepdaughter. And then there are tutors for that. That's what we'll dance from, Selena realized. John, but a tutor will do a much better job than me, she said. The father-in-law looked at his daughter-in-law carefully and thought she was probably right. John took everything about his beloved granddaughter seriously. And the question of Julia's education was one of the most important to him. That's right, he reasoned. I'd only got one granddaughter, so why trust her to someone professional? And yet there were doubts. Hiring a tutor is, first of all, letting a stranger into the house. Who knows what's on his mind? John, I beg you, said the daughter-in-law with a grin. afraid that the old man might change his mind. He'll do it. Do you really think the agency will keep thieves and other trash? When John went to the agency, he asked the agency for questionnaires of all the applicants in the field he was interested in. As a bedridden invalid, he didn't have time to go to all those agencies. What is this nonsense? Selena muttered, annoyed. She had noticed many times that things in the house were always out of place. Once a young woman had hung a blouse on the back of a chair, and when she had decided to move it to the closet, she had found it missing. The first thing Selena saw when she opened the closet was the blouse. It was like a poltergeist at work. She shook her head. Another time, a good half of the cutlets were missing from the skillet. A fresh loaf of bread, bought after work, had been cut off while Selena was taking a bath. Sometimes she had some suspicion, but the young woman brushed it aside for some reason. Maybe I'm just tired, she decided. John studied the resumes of tutors for elementary school students. His intuition had helped the old man in critical situations more than once. One glance at a photo of an applicant was enough to realize whether or not that tutor was a good fit for his granddaughter. Having rejected a couple of dozen potential math teachers for Julia, John sighed heavily, thinking that they were not all serious. And these were teachers. With only 5 applicants left, John decided to moderate his pickiness. And when he lost all hope of finding a tutor for his favorite, he suddenly liked Angelica, a very young girl. Not 18, of course, but a fresh and youthful enough face. A recent graduate, most likely, John thought. And after reading the questionnaire of the applicant, he was convinced that he was right. The girl had indeed graduated from the math department of the university in the last academic year. Of the photo, Angelica, unlike the other applicants, looked quite modest, her blonde hair slicked back, no makeup or jewelry. The girl's profile was at the very end of the list. An outsider, Mickey mentally summarized, and no references. Although where would they come from if she's straight out of university? The businessman caught himself defending the girl. For some inexplicable reason, the elderly businessman really liked her picture. Besides, John always liked to give to people who needed to get a grip on at least some opportunity. He had been one himself, so John wrote to Angelica. She wrote back about 5 minutes later. I'm sure she stayed on her computer waiting for a reply. Because of her lack of references, Angelica was willing to work for a piece of bread and a bowl of soup. According to the applicant, she was in dire need of money. Her fiancé needed a good lawyer. A good lawyer, John chuckled to himself. Working for food is hardly the way to raise money for a good lawyer. I wish I could see her for myself, this miracle of nature. Money for a lawyer for the groom. Despite his ironic thoughts, John already had a lot of respect for Angelica. Pretty's intuition told the businessman, this girl is what he needs. Among other things, in the column additional skills was indicated that she plays the violin, which finally won the heart of the elderly businessman. The thing is that in this respect, Angelica was close to him in spirit. When then, a long time ago, John went to music school and even in all seriousness dreamed of a career as a musician. But unfortunately, the situation in the country did not dispose to it. Another computer chirp, which meant a new message from an interested applicant, did not allow him to recollect. Angelica wrote that she was willing to meet at any time convenient for John. Well, here in Glorious, thought John, and not thinking long, offered the girl to come to his home. When Angelica saw the elderly man bedridden, she felt uneasy. Don't worry, you won't have to carry the ducks for me, he winked, intercepting the girl's gaze. I didn't think anything of the sort, Angelica replied, embarrassed. John nodded and began the interview. Julia entered the room. After about 10 minutes, the girl whispered something in the old man's ear, and then he said, You are accepted. Really? Rejoiced Angelica, but you've asked almost nothing yet. Really, John assured her, and smiling he added, Consider that the chief warden has approved your candidacy. So from tomorrow, you can start work. Angelica faithfully performed tutoring duties in the house John and Julia in her soul did not like. She enjoyed every minute she spent with her teacher. This child definitely needs love, Angelica stated. Julia reached out to her like a flower to the sun, and the girl reciprocated. Grandfather, said Julia one day at dinner, I want Angelica to live with us. Can we? Selena snorted, but John inquired, Angelica, would you really move in with us? I don't even know, the tutor muttered embarrassedly. Is that convenient? I'll say more, John smiled. It would be more convenient for everyone. You wouldn't have to spend money on transportation. Meals are on the inviting party. Selena shook her head disapprovingly, but no one paid any attention to her. It wasn't enough for her to eat at the sick man's bedside, but the old fool wanted to put up another spomber. Who am I to be fed by you? Angelica was finally embarrassed, as if she had overheard the thoughts of her employer's daughter-in-law. Well, you can contribute to the food supply, said John, remembering the girl's words that she was ready to work for food. Go for it. You won't regret it. But I have my own apartment. That's great, smiled the businessman. You can rent it out. I think, in your situation, additional income will not be superfluous. It's true, thought Angelica. How could I not have thought of it before? Thus, the question of the tutor living in John's house was resolved positively. One day, John called the tutor, as he put it, just for a chat. Since you're living in my house, it wouldn't be a bad idea to get to know each other, would it? Well, yes, Angelique smiled. Angelique, if I recall correctly, you play the violin? Yes, she nodded. Would you play something for me? Really? Exclaimed the girl. The last time I picked up an instrument was 2 years ago. Angelica, I assure you, it doesn't matter, assured the businessman. Your hands will remember everything. I also want Angelica to play the violin, said Julia, who had already managed to climb onto her grandfather's bed. Well, please. The tutor was reluctant, but she took the violin and began to play a tune. John suddenly felt hot. It was a very beautiful and sad melody. From the very first chords, it touched the heart, and the old man's heart shrank. And after a minute, John clearly realized that the melody was familiar to him. At first, the entrepreneur even thought he was having an auditory hallucination. No, it just can't be, John thought, realizing somewhere that it could be. The melody enveloped his whole being, and then smoothly picked up and transported him back to a time when John was still young and full of hope. Many years ago, as an 8th grader, John decided to devote his life to music, but life made its own adjustments. After school, he entered the conservatory, but did not pass the competition and fell under the fall draft. After the army, John again decided to try his luck. By the time of his return from the army, in the city opened a new music school. The guy applied there, and this time he succeeded. Moreover, John graduated from the school with honors, but decided not to stop there and applied to the conservatory. The diploma with honors did its job, and yesterday's graduate of the music school noticed. Teachers said that he had a real talent. John was not the only student endowed with talent. There was also Mallory, the girl he fell in love with. By the way, John honestly thought she was more talented than he was. Or did it seem that way to the young man because he was in love? At the evening of awarding diplomas, John confessed his love to Mallory, and the young people began to meet. They decided that they would get married in some wooden country church. All friends wondered when the wedding would take place, but the lovers were not destined to marry. Everyone John knew was sure he was going to be a star, but promotion cost a lot of money, which he didn't have. Perestroika struck, and the 90s came. There were many unsuccessful attempts to find a permanent job in his specialty, but all failed. John planned to talk seriously about marriage, but he felt guilty. What could he offer Mallory besides his love? John worked part-time in restaurants, gambled in the crosswalk, and money was in and out. Why are you fooling around? His school friend Alexander told him once, you can't live on music nowadays. Come and join us. You'll earn money for your wedding, and you'll have enough to live on. Sabrina and I went on vacation in Turkey a week ago, and if you work for us, you'll be able to afford such a trip. What can I say? The offer was tempting. And indeed, thought John, it would be nice to fly with Mallory to Turkey or somewhere else. I'll surprise her. Alexander worked in a rapidly growing firm selling audio, video, and home appliances, which in those years actively imported from abroad, and his business was booming. A school friend put in a good word for John, and the management never once regretted that they gave a chance to a graduate musician who was out of business. Truth be told, John didn't like the business that much, but it was the business that allowed John to survive in those difficult times. But as it turned out, Mallory thought otherwise. It would seem that nothing can interfere with their happiness, but the favorite girl turned out to be unusually principled. "Oh, John, you buried your talent in the ground," sadly stated her beloved. "Yes, I did not bury anything," John objected. "Now everyone survives as they can." "Business is so dirty," sighed Mallory. "Let me disagree with you. Yes, business is not creative, it's routine. But let's look at it from a different angle. Traveling abroad and useful acquaintances with foreign partners, well, isn't it a tempting prospect? I'll save up for the wedding and we'll have the ultimate party. Is that bad?" "John, I don't care what our wedding will be," she said fervently. "The main thing is that we'll be together. We'll devote our lives to art and travel all over the world." "With what money?" John grinned bitterly. "And then you see who is now prosperous and can afford all the goods of the earth. Businessmen. My uncle, the historian, assures me that the situation in the country will get better soon. And not only businessmen will be able to afford trips abroad. We just have to be patient." "Why should I be patient?" It seems that for the first time in their relationship, he started to turn on. "Why, tell me? Why live badly when you can live well?" You shook your head regretfully. "You haven't understood anything." "I don't get it," said John. And Mallory just turned around and walked away. He, of course, made attempts to reconcile, but his beloved was adamant. "Mallory does not want to see me in despair," said John Sashka. Young Green grinned. "Friend, in your Mallory is still alive youthful maximalism, but it passes. Love is love, but man is an earthly creature, and he needs food and clothing. So my friend, I hope we have some more wedding salads." Alexander turned out to be a bad visionary. The salads didn't work out that way. At least not at John and Mallory's wedding, who was adamant. Then one day John decided, "After all, I have my pride too." The couple eventually broke up. Eventually, as John got involved in the business, he realized that he was doing something not so boring. After working for the company for 3 years, John decided to start his own business. He succeeded. As for marriage, it happened much later. His wife Victoria was a very beautiful woman, but over time John realized that he and she could not become each other's kin. There was no warmth in the soul. On top of that, Victoria could not get pregnant for a long time. At the service of the wealthy couple were the most famous doctors in the United States, but the stars were clearly not on their side. "Unfortunately, we are not gods," divorced Barry, one of the best capital gynecologists. And then John's wife decided to resort to unconventional medicine. What the hell? They bypassed several fortune tellers, but they could not please them. John and Victoria did not give up, and eventually their patience was rewarded. Their attempts at parenthood had succeeded. It was a good witch doctor, or nature finally took mercy on the couple. But one day Victoria proudly announced to her husband that he would become a father. John was then already 39, his wife a year less. Despite the birth of a long-awaited son, a few years later the spouses of John divorced. John, being a generous and noble man, determined ex-spouse for life maintenance. But Mallory, he never saw him again. There were rumors that his Zasnova went to another city. Sometimes the elderly businessman thought that it was necessary to give in to Mallory, or better yet, find a compromise. Although what was there to say about it now? The melody awakened memories in the elderly man, long ago hidden in a far corner and locked on 7 locks, memories, and for good reason. After all, the author of the melody, which played Angelica, was the same girl from the past. He could not be mistaken. How does Angelique know that tune? Wondered John. Angelica is quite young, but Mallory must be in her 60s. What if she's my daughter? No, it doesn't add up. She's a recent university graduate, and Mallory and I broke up much earlier. John didn't even realize he was crying right away. "Grandpa, why are you crying?" Julia asked when the tune ended. "Are you sick?" No, John smiled through his tears. "On the contrary, I feel very good." "Angelica, please answer me one question. How do you know this tune?" "I learned it from a very good music teacher. I was referred to her by the orphanage. Mallory taught me the basics. By the way, she and I are still friends." Angelica smiled and added sadly, "And also me and Vanya, her son, was engaged. That is, we were engaged, but..." Mallory. Now John was sure. The mysterious music teacher could well be his first bride. However, there was no such thing as 100% certainty. How many women in the world have the name Mallory? After all, if his former fiancée taught music, it is quite logical that she could teach this tune to anyone. So the businessman decided to make the gentlest possible inquiries about her tutor. "Yes, I remember," you said. John nodded and moved on to the subject at hand. "She was a very nice woman indeed. Well, if you're engaged to her son." "Very nice." Angelique nodded with a smile. It was a pity she was in serious trouble. Her son is in prison and her grandson has been sent to an orphanage. Mallory tried to defend him, but she was rejected because of his age. "So your fiancé is in trouble with the law?" Mickey asked sympathetically. "No," Angelica sighed, "it's not like that." "Well, how?" The businessman needed maximum information, so he clarified everything, down to the smallest detail. In the end, John learned that the daughter-in-law of supposedly his former lover turned out to be a cuckoo. She gave birth to a son, Archie, and left him for her husband, that is, Evan. The spouses divorced, and a year later Evan met Angelica. Young people dreamed of getting married, but something happened that they did not expect. Evan worked as a security guard at a meat processing plant, and one day saw something that was not meant for his eyes. 5 men, led by the plant manager, were loading pork and beef carcasses into a truck. Eventually, the robbery was pinned on Evan. Allegedly, he was the tipster and was directly involved in the theft. "Evan's a tipster," the tutor grinned sadly, but he wouldn't have taken the wad of bills in front of him. "Once he and I were walking along the promenade and found a purse full of large bills. So he literally asked every passerby if he had lost the wallet." The old man was shocked. "Yes," he said thoughtfully, "it would be funny if it were not so sad. Angelica, I have a strange request for you. Would you mind bringing this woman to me?" "John," said the girl timidly, "with all my respect for you, I don't think it's very convenient at the moment. Mallory is hardly in the mood for visits at the moment." "Well, really? I don't mean to be intrusive, but this is very important to me," John insisted. "I understand." Angelica nodded with a slight smile, "But maybe sometime later. I don't think there could be a better time. What's more, I think I can help her." "Angelica, it's a matter of life and death." "Well, if it's a matter of life and death," the girl could not resist a smile, this time wide and sincere. "Angelica, either you tell me what's what or no visit," said Mallory. "Who is he, this mysterious patron? Does he have a name?" The tutor faltered. John had asked Angelica not to give his name. She respected the man and was determined to do as he asked. But on the other hand, Mallory really wasn't going anywhere. The woman was still as principled as she had been years ago. "All right," the girl decided. He'd actually asked not to be named. "So, you'll—" "I understand," smiled the music teacher. "Let it be our little female secret. So who is he?" "John." The name struck Mallory like a whip. No, more like a flash of lightning. "Wow, I thought I'd forgotten about him," the older woman thought. "Angelica," the older woman said in a squeezed voice, "well, I'll go and see your employer." Older, like me, a little better, but still the same eyes, thought John, looking at Mallory. And suddenly, in place of the staid old woman, appeared a young graduate of a music school with burning eyes. "Well, hello, Mallory," John greeted the one who really turned out to be his former fiancée. "Good afternoon, John," she smiled. John thought the businessman fondly, just like back then. Angelica, realizing that these two were obviously not just good acquaintances, delicately left the room. "Well, tell me, what do you live? What do you breathe?" John smiled back. "Me? Retired, but still teaching. Strangely enough, I still get students." "What's so strange about that? I always knew you were talented." "You are too, but—" Mallory was awkwardly silent, but her former lover understood everything and continued with a smile. "I remember, I buried my talent in the ground." God knows, Mallory not once scolded himself for his integrity, from which did not work out in the second marriage. She caught her husband with a mistress and couldn't forgive. "John, don't," shook her head the old woman. "Do you think I've never regretted it? And now here we are. Oh, God." Mallory suddenly cried bitterly. "Mallory, what's wrong?" John asked worriedly. Angelica told me that you have problems. Trouble. The woman sobbed. It's a disaster. But it's really not his fault. Evan is not capable of such a thing. Olga, tell me everything in order, John asked softly. Seriosa, I spell you, exclaimed Mallory. If you really have the ability, help him. After all, this is your son too. At first, John did not even immediately understand what his ex-fiancée told him. What son? And when he realized the meaning of what was said, the older man looked at Mallory in amazement. He is my son, John slowly said. That is, when we broke up with you? The elderly musician found it difficult to speak, and she only nodded frequently. Yes, John, repented Mallory. I was expecting a child from you, but I found out about it later, and you kept silent all that time. Yes, she said through her tears, I'm sorry. It's all because of my stupid principle. What is there to say about it now? John said bitterly, tears welling up in his eyes. I'll definitely help Ivan. After all, I owe him, and a lot. My fault, the ex-fiancé said quietly. It doesn't matter, John replied with a sigh, holding out his hand to her. Despite his helpless position, John quickly got the right people involved and took care of the matter. Are you sure everything will be all right? He asked his lawyer, and after hearing the answer, he sighed in relief and passed out. There was a knock at the door of his room. Come in. His sister-in-law entered the room. Frankly speaking, in the light of recent events, John had forgotten about her. Selena was always away, which he was glad of. When her sister-in-law was home, however, she rarely visited Mickey, only when absolutely necessary. So when she came in, his father-in-law inquired, Is something the matter? You could say that. The young woman nodded. John, frankly, I don't like what's going on. What's going on? He asked, puzzled. At least this tutor's accommodation, Selena snorted. It's like a passable courtyard, honestly. You've got people running around, and you're taking care of them. Can you imagine? The old marismatic has decided to start treatment. The girl heard Selena's tragic voice. Well, he's not that old, and especially not a marismatic. But you're a clever girl, answered a man's voice, which, as far as Angelica knew, belonged to the manager John. When she had first seen him, he had seemed a slippery fellow. I hope you'll be able to talk him out of the treatment, the manager said after a brief pause. The tutor crept to the storeroom and, holding her breath, carefully pulled the smartphone out of her purse and pressed the recorder button. You know, we need the old man helpless, the manager continued, so you'll do your best. Besides, he's bound to find out that we've caused your husband's accident. Angelica covered her mouth with her hand in horror. Hush, Selena hissed, and she remembered how Julia had compared her to a snake with ears. I'm motivating you, Harry grinned. What a motivator, giggled John's sister-in-law, after which the tutor heard the sounds of kissing, intermittent breathing, and passionate whispering. Angelica had no desire to eavesdrop on their antics, and the girl hurried over to Mickey. What is it then? Thought the tutor. This Selena pretending to be a decent stepmother, representing her stepdaughter's interests, while she herself is robbing Mickey without remorse and spending his money with her lover. And that manager is good too. Angelica knew that her son John had been killed in a car accident, and apparently she was the one in question. It suddenly occurred to the girl what the lovers had set up the accident for, most likely for the purpose of further eliminating John Sr. as well. Oh, mama, horrified the tutor. So it was they who set up the accident, and John and Juliet could be in danger too. At the thought of a student who had already suffered enough, Angelica felt completely creeped out. No, I just have to tell John everything. It's a good thing I made a tape, she thought. Angelica, is something wrong? John asked the tutor. Your face is gone. I have, she sighed, but not me, you. I don't understand. Angelica took out her phone and turned on the tape recorder. John listened to the conversation and, to the girl's amazement, laughed out loud. Well, that was to be expected, he said, wiping away tears. Selenka. Well, I never liked her, but we'll see who's who. Me too, thought Angelica. She remembered what Julia had said about the manager, and for the umpteenth time marveled at her childish intuition. After all, it is not for nothing they say that the mouth of a child speaks the truth. You are not afraid? Asked the girl. After all, you She was embarrassed, and John asked with a smile, "You mean an invalid? I'm not offended. Besides," the old man was meaningfully silent and got up from the bed. "So you?" From shock, Angelica could not utter another word. "Yes, Angelica." John spread his hands. "I'm not paralyzed. That is, I was, but the body, as predicted by the doctors, recovered on its own, without any surgery. I deliberately played this play to put the vigilance of my enemies to sleep. It's clear that my son was deliberately eliminated, but I didn't know who did it. There were several suspects. I eliminated one by one, leaving Selena and Harry. By the way, why don't you get them for me? Both of them." John's sister-in-law and the manager opened their mouths at the sight of John on his feet. "Surprised? Now get out, both of you. I suppose you can guess why." "I don't know what you mean," Celine said firmly. You don't? You don't? I don't advise you to deny it. There's a tape recording." "A tape of what?" her sister-in-law exclaimed indignantly. "Angelica, please turn on the tape," John asked the tutor, and seeing that Angelica hesitated, added, "Don't be afraid, you won't be in any danger. They can't help but realize that if something happens to you, it'll be clear whose handiwork it is." Angelica turned on the tape, and Selena, hearing her own voice, gave the tutor a hateful look. "Did you think I'd let you rob my own granddaughter and stain my son's memory?" John asked icily, noticing the look on his daughter-in-law's face. Selena preferred to keep silent, and the former father-in-law looked at her squeamishly and said stiffly, "Anyway, dear bride, you have 10 minutes to pack. You are allowed to stay in the house, and you shit right under my nose. I won't tolerate such ingratitude, I'm sorry. Well, you, dear Harry, are fired. I'm sure you'll never see a place like this again. Leave this house immediately and forget about it. I'll see you in court." Having got rid of his enemies, John breathed a sigh of relief and asked Angelica, "Do not you find that with their departure it even breathes easier?" The girl smiled. She was in complete agreement with her employer. As Selena was leaving the house, rolling out a crocodile-skin suitcase, the driver brought Julia home. Realizing what was going on, the overjoyed girl flew into the house, not even realizing that another pleasant surprise was waiting for her. "Grandpa, did you kick Selena out?" she exclaimed happily, and when she saw John sitting on his bed, she opened her mouth in surprise. "I did, sweetie," he nodded. "Grandfather, can you walk? Why didn't you say anything?" "It was necessary," John answered, and holding his granddaughter close to him, repeated, "It was necessary." "Cool," smiled Julia. "And now you'll take me to the park again." "I will. And in fact, now we'll live better than ever. By the way, Julia's vacation is soon, and we can go to the sea. How about it?" The girl laughed with relief and answered, "I'm all for it. Will Angelica come with us?" "Absolutely. And we'll take Evan and Archie with us. We're a family now." "Yay!" Julia screamed. The girl had already had time to get acquainted with Nikita and adored the boy. What is there? She sincerely considered him her little brother. It would seem that all the vicissitudes remained far behind. Selena and Harry received 10 years in prison each, and thus, good has triumphed over evil. But it seems a quiet old age is not about John. A few days later, he received a phone call from a woman he didn't know. "Hello, John," she greeted the businessman and introduced herself. "My name is Maria. I represent the interests of your ex-wife, Victoria." Hearing the ex-wife's name, John was taken aback. What does this one want? The answer to the unspoken question was not long in coming. "The thing is that your Victoria is seriously ill, and she has not long to live," explained the attorney of the ex-wife of the businessman. "She wants to see you." To be honest, John didn't really want to see his ex-wife, but the last will of a dying man is a holy thing. And then, apparently, it's really important. The ex-wives hadn't seen each other in over 20 years, and John was amazed at the change in Victoria. At the divorce proceedings, he had been confronted by a stately brunette with smooth, slightly swarthy skin, radiant brown eyes, and attractive lips. Now John could not believe that this gaunt older woman, who looked at him with completely colorless eyes, was his first wife. "Well, hello, John," Victoria wheezed and coughed harshly. "Hello," John replied discreetly. "You wanted to see me. I've never seen you before. The ex-wife snorted, and John thought that their desires, or rather, their reluctance, coincided. He recognized her now, albeit vaguely. "But I want to repent to you." "Really?" "Yes, imagine that. I didn't expect it of myself. But they say it makes it easier to go to the afterlife. Have a seat." John sat down on the chair next to the bed of the dying ex-wife and prepared to listen. There wasn't much to tell. Victoria shrugged her thin shoulders. "Well, John, the late Jacob wasn't your son." "What do you mean?" Mickey was stunned. After a string of failed attempts to conceive, the ex-wife sighed. "A doctor I knew told me it was probably a matter of incompatibility and advised me to have a lover, so I took her advice. And eventually I did get pregnant. With a lover." "Oh God!" John exclaimed, wrapping his arms around his head. He'd been so proud of Jacob for looking like him, the idiot. Victoria must have picked a lover with dark eyes and hair. "Well, that's it," the dying wife said quietly, coughing again. "Well, thank you for your frankness." John nodded and after a little thought asked, "Is there anything I can do to help you? Medication or—" "I don't need anything." Victoria shook her head. "Because you've already kept me like a queen. There's enough for the funeral. Now go with God. You've repented. Now you won't be afraid to die. Thank you for listening." John left his ex-wife's house depressed. You never know what to expect from a bitchy woman. Depends on the kind of woman, though. Selena, for instance, had it written all over her face. Or Angelica. The only difference is what it said. Victoria had always been unpredictable, even, as it turned out, on death's doorstep. John remembered Jacob. He loved the boy like a native son and was proud of his accomplishments, of which, thankfully, there were many. Besides, Jacob had made a significant contribution to this business. But anyway, John has only one native son, Evan, who only a few days ago found out about his kinship with the entrepreneur. So maybe it's time to start paying back his son's debts. After all, release from the detention center and the return of little Archie from the orphanage is the least that John could do for Evan. So John went to a seemingly long-forgotten address. "Hi, Mallory," he said, smiling with just his eyes. "Hi, John," she nodded. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. By the way, I'm sorry, I forgot to call you to thank you." "Thank you? For what?" John exclaimed in surprise. "For getting Evan acquitted." Mallory pleased. "It's my duty as a father." "Do you know what I came here for?" "Why did you come here?" "Let's start again," he said quietly, taking Mallory's hands. "But we're so old," she smiled. "Not at all," laughed John. "We're 18. Or have you forgotten?" "Thanks for reminding me." 3 months passed. The small village church was covered with greenery, and it was an incredibly beautiful landscape. In front of the priest stood a gray-haired Nulu couple, but they knew they were 18. "How beautiful Mallory is, isn't she?" Angelica whispered to the groom. "My mom is the most beautiful in the world." Evan immediately agreed. "Not counting you. You're my favorite." 2 weeks ago they were married. Angelica stayed at John's house because thanks to her, John was able to expose the criminals and nail them to the wall. In addition, now Angelica became the daughter-in-law of an elderly businessman. So the question of housing for the newlyweds was solved. There was room for everyone in this spacious mansion. Julia looked at the newlyweds and was over the moon. They got rid of the hated Selena, Angelica, and Evan adopted Julia. She had a brother, Archie, whom the girl loved with all her soul. This was quite enough for happiness, and now grandfather will marry a good woman. Despite her very young age, Julia realized that the family is the most valuable thing that a person has. And the fact that she was growing up was great. After the wedding, all went to a cozy rural restaurant, the owner of which was a good friend of John. The guests were welcomed by a hall full of fresh flowers and, of course, a beautifully set table. An elderly newlywed took the floor. "First of all, my dears, I suggest you thank fate for bringing us all together. Sometimes I think that all this might not have happened, and I feel sad, especially because Olenka and I would never have become husband and wife." "Well, enough already, old geezer," laughed Mallory. "We are together, and everything else is such nonsense." "That's right," said John approvingly. "And now I propose to drink to our happiness." Bitterly, Evan exclaimed, and the rest of the group joined in. "Now I'd like to ask for a moment of attention," exclaimed a friend of the groom, whose name was Mickey. The guests were silent, and Mickey came on stage and took out his violin from backstage and approached his old friend. "Dear friend, I remember you not only as a successful businessman and just a good man. I also remember you as a talented violinist. I suggest you remember your youth. Play us something." "I remembered my grandmother as a girl." John laughed. "No, guys, do you want my disgrace? Why would you want to be embarrassed? I'm sure you'll be fine." "John," Angelica winked slyly, "and remember how you told me that the hands will remember everything?" "Well, it looks like I can't get away with this," John said. "God help you, you're on." John took the violin in his hands as if it were a piece of fine crystal. The audience watched the elderly businessman, who never became a musician, and waited in awe for him to start playing. And he did. It was the same tune composed by Mallory, his first, and as it turned out, only love. John began to play timidly, as if reluctant, and then the old man sank into a veil of memories, and the melody sounded more and more confidently. Now his thoughts were in the place where he was young, in love and full of plans. "Bravo!" shouted Mickey when John had finished playing. The blushing violinist bowed to the audience and began to play a cheerful medley. The audience clapped in time with the music. And then there were cries of bitter toast to love and anticipation of happiness, which only a man can dream of. Time flew inexorably. Evan and Angelica had a son, whom the couple named Billy, and 2 years after the birth of their son, Angelica proudly announced to her husband that the family was about to have a new addition. And not just an addition, but a whole twin. As it turned out, 2 girls. Just some kind of female battalion. Shook his head happy father. "Well," giggled Angelica, "beautiful ladies will be more only one. So maybe after the birth of twin girls we'll try to equalize the number of ladies and gentlemen." Evan winked. "God forbid." His wife splashed her hands. "It wouldn't be a bad idea to have our daughters first." When John found out that he was going to become a grandfather again, he thought about buying a new house, a bigger one. As a result, this friendly family settled outside the city in a monumental mansion, stylized as a Boyer manor. Some of their friends and acquaintances said that the young people should live separately. However, Evan, Angelica, and their children liked to live together with their parents. After all, they were the most wonderful old people in the world. And then both families lived their own lives. John and Mallory traveled a lot, and if they were at home, they did not bother the young with advice and moralizing. Well, and the young people in turn tried not to upset the old people and do not bother them in vain. 3 years after the birth of twins Catherine and Elizabeth, Mallory seriously ill. The cancer was detected when there was nothing to be done, except to accept it. The old woman quietly passed away in her sleep, right on the night of Epiphany. "She is well now," Angelica said quietly, looking at the calm, peaceful face of her old friend, and crossed herself. On the day of the funeral of the elderly musician, despite the frosts of baptism, it was warm and quiet. Flakes of snow were falling. John, aged from grief, did not shed a tear. "No more tears," said the widower, watching his ex-wife being lowered into the ground. The elderly businessman threw a handful of earth and whispered, "Sleep well, my love. Our happiness was short, but real." A month later, John himself was gone. "Grandpa couldn't do it without her," sobbed Julia, who was in her senior year of high school. She had so dreamed of inviting her grandfather to her graduation, but alas. A few days after John's 40th birthday, the children decided to sell the mansion. The maintenance of such a huge house was not cheap, and Evan and Angelica had to raise 5 children. In addition, this year Julia entered the institute, and it implied expenses, and Archie's enrollment was just around the corner. The buyer came along a couple months later. He was a wealthy older man, formerly a successful producer, now the owner of 2 restaurants. "I want to give the house to my doll," he winked at the Mallory couple. Evan and Angelica nodded absently. In truth, they didn't care who they sold to, as long as they sold. The children were at school, and the couple packed their bags, wondering how the joyous events of the house had been intertwined with the sad ones. And here's how it happens, Angelica thought. If I hadn't met Vanya and fallen in love, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't have come to work for John. We wouldn't have adopted Julia. Vanya might never have known who his father was. There's all sorts of don'ts, but history, as you know, does not bear the subjunctive mood. Philosophical thoughts interrupted the voice of her husband. Angelica, what is it? Look what I found. Even stood by the closet, which he was preparing to dismantle, and pointed to a door in the wall. A secret door. Angelica spluttered. Exactly. It's crazy. The husband shook his head in surprise. How long have lived here and did not even know about the existence of this door? Yes, I wonder what's in there. Let's go in and see for ourselves. Evan and Angelica entered the secret door. The room behind the secret door was dark, so they didn't immediately see what made them numb with terror. Goosebumps ran down each of the couple's backs. There were 3 human skulls on the shelf, and the room looked terribly dark. Do you think they are real? Angelique asked, trembling with fear, pointing at the skulls. I have no idea, Evan said. Hold on. I'm going to get a flashlight. I'll go with you, said the wife hastily. You coward. You'll chicken out. Angelica shivered. Julia, who had come back from school, entered the room. What is this? The girl exclaimed in surprise when she saw the secret door open. And this, daughter, is a secret door, Evan answered. Wow, what's behind the secret door? Julia asked, looking through it and immediately recoiled. Oh, it's so dark. Well, what's a flashlight for? Grinned her father. They entered the mysterious room, and when Evan shined the flashlight, all 3 of them gasped. Right in the middle of the room was a large chest. I wonder what's in it, muttered the head of the family. Probably gold and diamonds, Julia giggled. Yeah, keep your pocket wide open, said Angelica. The chest, which was covered with cobwebs, was not locked, and when they jointly lifted the lid, they could not restrain a cry of amazement. And you said, keep your pockets wide open, said Julia, turning to her mother. There were indeed jewels in the chest. A lot of jewelry, including gold and diamonds, and there was a letter. Oh, it's grandfather's handwriting. Angelica took the letter and began to read it aloud. My dear children, if you are reading this letter, you must have discovered a secret door. Now let me guess, John wrote, you must be getting ready to sell the house because it costs a lot of money to maintain. Relax. These jewels I've collected over the years will save you from having to sell the house. It's up to the owner, of course, but I'd be very hurt if you did sell the house. It's sacred to me. I'd like to see more of John's generation grow up here. But of course, the choice is yours. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. I love you all very much. Your John. P.S. By the way, the skulls on the shelves are just a prop for mystery. So, what do you think? Angelica asked after finishing the letter. Yes, grandfather loves special effects, Julia sighed. His helpless state is worth it. Do you remember? How could I not remember? Grinned her mother. I saw Mickey get out of bed and thought I was hallucinating. And now he surprised us even after his death. So what are we going to do with the house? Evan spoke up. The answer is obvious. Angelica smiled. I'd be ashamed to sell it anyway. And it's not even about the jewelry. Perhaps, agreed her husband. The doorbell rang. The restaurateur's producer and a young, glamorous woman who seemed vaguely familiar to Angelique appeared in the video eye. When the couple entered, she was surprised to recognize Selena, Mickey's former sister-in-law. So this is your house? Selena was surprised. She had changed over the years, but she was still pretty. Selena had cut her hair short and changed it from golden blonde to dark brown. She had also lost some weight, and if it weren't for the haughty expression on her face, Selena could be called a real beauty. In fact, she was, except that they were used to appreciating the beauty of the soul above all else. Judging by the unkind expression on Julia's face, the girl recognized her former stepmother as well. I'm sorry, Angelica said, embarrassed, but the house is not for sale. What kindergarten? Exclaimed the man, then sold, then not sold. I was on my way from the city, by the way. Yes, I understand, she nodded, and we are ready to compensate you for the cost of travel. What does money have to do with it? The buyer grumbled with annoyance. I really like the house, the aura is good, and look, maybe you're not satisfied with the price. I'm willing to pay more. I assure you it's not about the price, Angelique assured me. Is it about me? Selena gritted her teeth. No, it's nothing personal, the former tutor shrugged. It's just that something came up and we changed our minds about selling the house. I don't understand. Did you two know each other? The man was confused. We do. Angelica nodded, but it has nothing to do with selling the house. As I said, it's nothing personal. The buyer, realizing there would be no deal, sighed disappointedly and said, "Well, too bad. Come on, Selena. We'll look for something else for you." Selena just shrugged her shoulders and the buyers left the mansion. As soon as the door closed behind them, all three of them laughed. "I still can't forget Selena's face," Julia laughed. "It was a sight to behold," Angelica agreed. "And Selena doesn't lose her way," she said ironically. "She's got herself a new rich guy. I even feel sorry for him. She's going to make him have an accident." Tears welled up in Julia's eyes. Of course, Evan loved her as his daughter, but no one could replace her father. When the girl remembered Selena, hatred embraced her with terrible force. Selena John was furious. It was such a great house, and this tutor confused all the cards. Besides, Selena had old scores to settle with Angelica. A fortune like that slipped through the cracks. And the years in prison, and all because of that hussy. And she and he had a good thing going. Who'd have thought that damn tutor was standing there, listening to their conversation and recording it on a tape recorder? Is she trying to get a rise out of you? Well, he do last laughs. I wonder what made them change their mind about selling the house. Harvey, the restaurateur, said thoughtfully. "Well, I don't know," shrugged Selena. "I wonder," she thought, "what did she and her hubby use to buy such a huge house? Or did old John dole it out? He'll do it." Selena already knew that her former father-in-law was in the kingdom of heaven, but she didn't know that the tutor's husband was John's own son. "I don't think it's that simple." Harvey shook his head. "It just can't be. When a man decides to sell his house, he needs money, or he's serious about moving. And then they change their mind overnight. No warning. Something's not right. We should do some research on this house." The young woman decided Harvey was probably right. Who knows, it might help Selena get even with Angelica. The restaurateur went home, and his beloved took out of the bar a bottle of his favorite cream liqueur, made himself comfortable on the couch, and plunged into the memories. Already in the 10th grade, Selena Kolevanova knew that appearance was her main trump card. She knew another thing. This trump card could help Selena to change her life for the better. After all, it was then that she, a girl from a poor family, fell in love with the son of a successful businessman, Jacob John. The guy offered her to date, and Selena immediately agreed. She imagined that she would live in a luxurious mansion and, of course, would not work. However, at the end of school, a rich dad sent Jacob to study abroad, and all dreams of a beautiful life collapsed overnight. "Relax," Selena said to herself mentally. "I'm a beautiful girl, and Jacob is not the end of the story." She had a new plan, which, by the way, seemed much more interesting. Of course, it would take more than a year to realize the plan, but for sure. Selena's plan was as follows. To begin with, the girl decided to enroll in technical school and learn the profession of accountant. Actually, with her ability to do math, she could go to university. But the higher institution was not suitable for Selena for one simple reason, because it was necessary to study there for 5 years, while the term of study in her chosen technical school was only 2 years. Waiting for a beautiful life for 5 years? No way, no way. After technical school, she will work a little in some firm, find a wealthy beau, and marry him legally. And then Selena will live a life of pure pleasure. My plan will work, thought the girl with delight. When she learned that she was enrolled in technical school, what else will happen? Selena studied well and was confidently going for a red diploma. "You'll make a great accountant," said Emma, the accounting teacher, approvingly. Hopefully not for long, Selena thought. Work? What a bore. Well, she did not understand women who defended the right to work as a doctor, teacher, chemist, streetcar driver, and God knows who else. And when her friends told Selena that they wanted to work for pleasure, she wrinkled her nose as if she had a toothache. Where's the work and where's the fun? Selena snorted when Aubrey's classmate told her plans for her life. "I don't know," she shrugged. "Personally, I think I'm going to make work a pleasure. Socializing again. Do you see yourself as a hybrid of an incubator, a governess, and a doll from an intimate store?" No, smiled the girl. I see myself as the beauty and pride of the house. The main thing is to move in the right direction. She only shook her head. Meanwhile, Selena's plan worked even after receiving her red diploma. She managed to get a job at a rather prosperous confectionery company. Selena was repeatedly offered to enter the correspondence department of the institute, and having studied, to take the position of technologist. But the young accountant categorically refused. After all, she had other plans for life. Finally, Selena smiled luck in the form of a new commercial director. Tony was single, and the young woman decided, here's my chance. And Selena did miss it. In the firm worked a lot of spectacular women, but the commercial director chose her, and not just chose, and called her to marry. The whole organization was celebrating the wedding. After the honeymoon in Paris came the harsh everyday life, and they turned out to be not as rosy as Selena had first thought. I've decided to quit, the young woman announced to her husband. What is it? Tony asked with a smile. Or do you want to make me happy? Selena understood perfectly well what her spouse meant. However, she preferred to pretend she didn't. To make you happy, she smiled back. I'm going to take care of the house and spoil you with home-cooked food. I assure you, I'll make it as good as in the restaurant. Tony stretched out disappointedly. Selena, I appreciate your eagerness to do housework, but I don't mind a woman working. Did you think I was planning on locking you away? I assure you, that is not the case. All right, Selena nodded, hiding her disappointment. Thank you. You're welcome, Tony replied, kissing her. I realized that most modern women don't want to be housewives. And Selena continued working at the company. Well, and what are you steamed? With a chuckle asked a friend Veronica. When Selena told about the conversation with her husband does not embarrass your freedom. Is that a bad thing? Didn't you say that the husband should support the family and the woman should take care of the house and herself? Well, I did, but my outlook on life has changed. Now, Selena, I'm all for equality. A golden cage isn't good either. Veronica was married to a businessman who was against her working and accordingly knew what she was talking about. However, her friend's words made no impression on Selena. All she knew was that she did not wish to work. Selena wanted to live a life of pleasure and shine at social events. And the golden cage? Well, there are other women living in it, and Veronica's just going crazy. As time went on, Selena realized that Tony just didn't respect women who didn't work. In fact, there was nothing to understand. Once he contemptuously called one of these women domestic, and Selena realized that in this marriage she had nothing more to catch. When the young woman talked about divorce, Tony was surprised, however, did not resist. Selena had again launched into an active search for a wealthy Sujinogo. She studied dating sites from time to time. Friends introduced Selena to different men, but eventually she did it on her own. A chance meeting with a former lover in the restaurant of a business hotel became fateful. She decided that Jacob John is what she needs. The young, handsome widower was rich. The only thing that confused Selena was that Jacob had a daughter. But on the other hand, what could she do? No one forced her to love Juliet as if she were her own. It was enough to give the appearance of caring. Meeting Sosnowski, her father-in-law John's manager, turned Selena's life upside down. She realized that she had fallen in love, and it seems not without reciprocity. And so it proved to be. Harry turned out to be not only savvy, but also a greedy, calculating man. But most importantly, he was willing to do anything for Selena. That was what had prompted the manager's plan to eliminate first his son, then his father, and then the little Harris. Jacob's plan was a success, but his father's was a misfire. The doctors said John's body would recover in time, but Selena didn't believe it. As it turned out, she shouldn't have. I wonder when it happened. Selena thought sometimes when she was in places not so remote, because at first he didn't fake it. Does it matter? If it hadn't been for that damn tutor, Andre and I might have been able to finish what we started. The young woman was released on parole. Despite the fact that Selena returned not from the resort, she still looked beautiful, except she'd lost weight, which means that nothing prevents her from finding a new rich patron. Selena couldn't get a real job anyway, and she didn't want one, so it's back to the search. The first thing, she decided to change her appearance. Selena cut off her long blonde hair and dyed it a darker color. Looking in the mirror, she was pleasantly surprised. The new hairstyle and hair color transformed Selena. She looked younger and her face looked more interesting. Now it was just a matter of looking for an object to build a bright future. Her requirements for a candidate for a life partner were simple: man must be single and rich. The first thing the young woman bought after leaving the colony was an inexpensive smartphone. After returning from the hairdresser's shop, Selena began to concentrate on studying dating sites and was disappointed. It felt like the most flawed men were sitting on them. What's so surprising, though, she thought. A decent man doesn't need dating sites. With nothing to do, Selena logged onto a social networking site and a post caught her eye. A new restaurant owned by Harvey's former producer needed a bartender. No, Selena wasn't interested in the job, but the owner. When she was married to Jacob, they had gone to the concert of a well-known musical group whose producer was Harvey. This band was not Harvey's only child, and no wonder. His entrepreneurial spirit was legendary in the city, so now he owns a restaurant. After typing Harvey into the search engine, Selena almost jumped for joy. The restaurant owner was divorced, so what is not a chance to improve the financial situation and at the same time arrange a personal life? Unfortunately, there was no money to spend in this definitely not cheap restaurant. However, there was an idea. Selena put on a small black dress, left from her past life, black lacquered shoes made of bright, spectacular makeup, and taking a clutch in the tone of shoes, gracefully left the house. She could not afford a cab, and the young woman went, as she hoped, to meet the life from which she did not want to get rid of. "What shall we order?" the waiter asked. "A salad with mussels and avocado, a glass of grappa, and perhaps a fruit platter," Selena replied with a dazzling smile. "Well, fine choice," nodded the guy and stepped away from the table. "That's for sure," the young woman grinned to herself, not referring to dinner at all. It was just under an hour before the restaurant closed, and Selena couldn't help but notice the slanted glances of the bartender and waiter in her direction. A couple minutes later, the latter came to her table and asked, "Will you order something else?" "You see, there's a situation." Selena hesitated. "What's the matter?" The waiter was wary, guessing what it was. "The thing is that I forgot the money," she answered, embarrassed. "I would like to solve this issue directly with Harvey. But maybe you could call someone and borrow some money. You see, it's getting late." "Well, who am I going to call now?" "Well, Harvey and I know each other a little. I think that would be easier," Selena said more firmly. "Well, all right," the waiter replied with a little hesitation. Harvey arrived about 20 minutes later. "I'm listening to you," he said in an impassive voice, not without interest, I must say, looking at Selena. "You see, I forgot my money," she smiled shyly, "and in order to avoid conflict, I decided to address you directly." "Aha," nodded the owner of the place. "Well, commendable, but you know what?" Selena looked questioningly at Harvey, and he said exactly what she expected. "This dinner will be on the house." "How?" The young woman pretended to be surprised. "And for what merits?" "And consider it a component," said Harvey, and winking at it, "personally for me." That day, Harvey drove her home. They exchanged phone numbers and started dating. Harvey turned out to be a generous and gallant chancellor. Too bad he didn't ask her to marry him. But he once complained about Selena's living conditions and promised to buy her an apartment. Or should it be a house? Harvey asked with a smile. "A house is great." Selena nodded approvingly, remembering John's mansion. "Well, that's a deal." The house the beau had chosen was much cooler than John's mansion. Selena, seeing his photo, was even confused. "What am I going to do alone in such a huge house?" "I think you and I will find something to do," Harvey said meaningfully, and the next day they went to make a deal. When Selena saw the lady of the house, she was surprised. However, she was much more surprised that the sellers refused the deal. At first, Selena thought it was because of her, but Harvey convinced her otherwise. And then she thought it was strange too. After a couple of shots of delicious liquor, the young woman felt sleepy. Selena gladly laid down on the cool silk sheets and instantly fell asleep. The next morning, she received a call from Harvey. "Kitten, what have I found out?" he exclaimed. "Yes, Trying to make her voice sound indifferent, Selena said, "And what did you find out?" "According to rumors, there might be a treasure hidden in this house." "What nonsense?" snorted the young woman. "Maybe it's nonsense, maybe it's not. The thing is, there were legends about this house. Rumors, perhaps. Either way, it should all be checked out." Celine sighed. Truth be told, it didn't sound very plausible. But what the hell was the point? There's no smoke without fire. "Evan, I have a feeling someone's been in the house," Angelica told her husband. "Why would that be?" Evan asked. "When I left for work yesterday, I closed the window. When I came home this evening, the window was open. But maybe you hadn't closed the window after all," he suggested. "Evan, do I look like an old sclerotic?" "Well, why would you look like an old sclerotic? Maybe you meant to close the window, but in your haste, you forgot and you thought you closed it." "Maybe so," Angelica said, but there was no hint of confidence in her voice. She remembered perfectly well that she had closed the window. 3 days after this conversation, Evan was forced to take his wife's words more seriously. He noticed that the very closet behind which the secret door had been moved. But Evan remembered that he had pushed the closet in quite tightly. Something was telling him. Was this related to their attempt to sell the house? Why? There was only one theory that came to mind, and Evan didn't like it. Before she went to bed, Angelica said to her husband, "Evan, can't we get rid of these jewels? Well, we lived without them. Now you're a successful businessman. Things are going well, and maybe you think you were looking for jewelry too." He sighed. There was no point in playing the silent game when it was obvious. "And how do you propose I get rid of them?" Evan asked, puzzled. "And then don't forget that we didn't sell the house because of them. Business is business, but you can't get by without a financial cushion these days." "I understand," sighed the young woman, "but I can feel it in my bones that these jewels will bring us a lot of problems. So turn them into money. What's the problem? In fact, my father left them to us as an inheritance, didn't he?" "So," Angelica sighed again, "but somehow it's all. I don't even know how to explain it. I'll put it this way. I have a bad feeling about this. Why don't we donate it to some orphanage or hospice?" "Angelica, I'll let you in on a secret. I do too. But then we have to do something about it. Without them, we can't afford to keep the house. You know that." "I think I know what to do," Angelica said slowly. Well, it's really not a big deal. Harvey, I have found out everything," excitedly exclaimed Harvey, the man who from time to time rendered Harvey specific services. "There is a secret door in this house." "Well, and the treasure that has been talked about, does it really exist?" "The room behind the secret door was empty," the handyman said. "Apparently the treasure had been hidden away, if it was there at all. So why the hell are you saying you found out? And come back as soon as you know something concrete." "Understood," Harvey nodded nonchalantly. "Come on," Harvey grimaced and waved his hand. "It's obvious what's been stashed away," he thought. Harvey could feel in his bones that there was a treasure. But was it in the house now? Everyone in John's house was sleeping peacefully. Only Julia was awake. The clock was already past midnight, but the girl did not sleep a wink. It had been 3 months since Julia had fallen in love with a boy who came to the parallel class from another school. The guy was really incredibly good-looking, tarry hair, piercing blue eyes, and Apollo's physique. Unusual looks, Julia thought, looking at his photo on the social network. It's just a pity that the boy didn't pay any attention to her. And why would he need Julia when this dama was chasing almost the whole female half of the school? She, of course, God had not hurt her looks either, but one girl more, one less for such a handsome boy obviously did not matter. Under such unhappy thoughts, Julia, hoping to fall asleep, slowly drank a glass of milk, and suddenly she was horrified to see how 2 men in dark clothes and masks approached the cellar, where they kept pickles, jams, and homemade wine. In the hands of one of the intruders was a pluck, with which he skillfully broke the lock, after which the men climbed inside. With horror, the girl could not move from her seat. It suddenly seemed to Julia that if she did so, the criminals would hear, and then, shrieking with terror, the girl ran toward her parents' bedroom, where she ran into Billy. "You heard the rustling from the cellar too?" whispered his brother. "And even saw everything," Julia whispered back in a tragic voice. "I was sitting in the kitchen, and there..." There were two men there, and they, from excitement and fear, the girl began to stammer, but still finished. There were two men in the cellar. So what are we waiting for? We have to wake up the parents and call the police, the boy said firmly and banged on the door of Evan and Angelica's bedroom. The first to wake up was the mother. She had been a restless sleeper lately. What's wrong? Angelica asked in a sleepy voice. There's someone in the cellar, the son whispered excitedly. Julia called the police. Already? Laughed Evan, who also woke up and stretched his eyes. But Mr. Harvey can't wait to get his father's jewels. So they're in the cellar now? Billy exclaimed. The wail of a police siren prevented the parents from answering. All four of them went downstairs. Did you call the police? One of the officers asked. Yes, nodded Evan. What happened? There are two criminals in our cellar right now, replied the homeowner. Where's the cellar? Over there, Evan pointed, and the law enforcement officers rushed in that direction. Hey, is there anyone here? One of the policemen shouted, and the other shone a flashlight into the cellar. There were two men lurking in the corner. Come out at once, shouted the policeman, and the intruders had no choice but to obey. Archie, Catherine, and Elizabeth came down into the hallway. Why can't you sleep? Angelica asked, more for the sake of order. You can't sleep, Archie muttered. What's the matter? I think it's obvious, Evan grinned. People came for the jewelry. So they're in the cellar? Patience, boys, replied the father in a mysterious tone, and at that moment one of the policemen entered the house and invited the couple to come with them. So, who sent you? Asked the investigator Anthony, but the criminals were silent as fish. Who is the customer? I asked. The thieves continued to remain silent. Do you have any idea who it could be? The investigator turned to the couple. Actually, I do, Evan nodded. It's probably Harvey, the owner of the restaurants. Are you sure? Yes, we recently planned to sell the mansion and he was the only potential buyer. Of course, theoretically, it could be anyone, but I don't believe in such coincidences. So Anthony asked, turning to the night spies again, is it really Harvey? You realize it's going to come out. I told you not to sign up for this, muttered one of the criminals, and Angelica only then noticed that the boys were still young, not much older than Julia. I wonder what made them do it, she thought. So it was really Harvey? The investigator repeated his question. Yes, admitted the second intruder. The couple arrived home in the morning. The kids were awake. They were hungry for details. There's nothing to tell, shrugged the head of the family. Those bastards were sent by Mr. Harvey. But they will be used as witnesses in the case. Why? Julia asked. They're just young kids, Evan said. What did they have to do with anything? They weren't even Harvey's people. They were just kids. Kids from dysfunctional families who wanted to make what they thought was easy money. How would they know there was fake jewelry in the cellar? Fake? The children exclaimed in unison. Exactly, smiled Angelica. When it became clear to the Mallorys that someone was looking for the secret door and obviously the jewelry, they decided to take emergency measures. Angelica took cheap costume jewelry imitating diamonds, pearls, and other precious stones, and the couple substituted the originals for glass. Well, and the real jewelry is in a safe deposit box at the train station. She finished her story with a smile. It was all our mom's idea, Evan said, putting his arm around his wife, her idea. Mom is our head, Elizabeth yawned. Well, ahead, said Angelica modestly. Let's go to bed. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Thank God, tomorrow is Sunday. Harvey, asked the policeman, a representative man in a luxurious satin robe, who had just brewed a good portion of coffee. Yes, that's me, nodded the restaurateur. What can I do for you? You are under arrest on a charge of organizing a crime, replied the policeman nonchalantly. What nonsense, exclaimed Harvey. I am a respected man in the city, a businessman, not some thief in the law. One doesn't prevent the other, said the second policeman nonchalantly, and added, Harvey, you'll have to come with us. You have 10 minutes to pack. I want a lawyer. One phone call was not canceled, the police officer noted. After hearing about the arrest of a high-profile suitor, Selena was ready to throw down. It's that damn tutor again. How long would that thing stay in her way? Selena knew it was pointless to retaliate. She would only hurt herself. The young woman was not involved in this case, so it was better not to wait the storm while it was still quiet. It's better to look for a new wealthy man. She's not getting any younger. You should go to work, said Veronica. Well, you're a smart woman. Aren't you tired of waiting for the weather? Who needs me with a criminal record? Selena sighed. I'm certainly not going to get a job in my specialty. They were sitting in a summer cafe on the seafront, and Selena noticed that her friend was looking around, probably afraid that some of her husband's men will catch her with an ex-con. She thought with a wry chuckle, and she wasn't far from the truth. It's unlikely that you'll get a job in your specialty, Veronica nodded, but you could get a job in a bar or a kitchen worker. Selena interrupted irritably. Thank you for your good advice, or I wouldn't have guessed without you. Well, suit yourself. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Her friend resolutely got up from the table and walked away. Selena knew they would never see each other again. What if I go abroad? A thought struck her, by the way. I have some money, enough for the first time. And here, it seems, I have nothing to catch. Did you not know that this house has long been rumored to have a treasure in it? Incredulously asked the investigator during the pre-trial conversation. Even I had heard about it. No, Evan replied. All we know is that my father bought jewelry and, as it turned out, put it in a chest. Not all of the jewelry was purchased by your father, Anthony said. A few pieces were lying there much earlier. The house had originally belonged to a rich merchant, then to some other people, and when they died, it had been empty for several years. Tell me, please, do we have to pay something for finding these ornaments? Angelica inquired. A tax for some percentage. By law, you have to pay for something that didn't belong to you, Anthony explained. But as I explained, it's only a few pieces, and a special investigation will reveal which ones. So you won't lose too much. That's not the point, Mallory said with a sigh. We just wanted to keep things fair. You know, we're even planning to donate some of the money from the jewelry sale to the orphanage. Well, it's the right thing to do, said the investigator approvingly. You'll do a really good deed. And I, for my part, will try to make sure that you pay the minimum. The producer-restaurateur got 5 years in prison. They were glad that justice had been served, but that's all. There was no gloating at all, except that there was anger at the thought of a grown-up, respectable man using young, stupid boys to do his evil deeds. It's because of such Harvey and his kind that young people stumble, Evan sadly stated. He remembered how many years ago he had been framed and wondered how many unjustly convicted people there were. As the couple walked out of the courthouse, Evan suddenly asked, Angelica, do you remember your father and mother's wedding? Of course I remember, she replied with a smile. But why do you ask? Because I want to suggest that you do the same. Let's get married. This is a very serious step, Angelica said slowly, looking at her husband intently. Evan exclaimed, I think we have proved to each other and to everyone who knows us that we are not serious. So what about the wedding? Are you in? Yes, whispered the woman, and tears of happiness glistened in her beautiful and so dear eyes. The small, recently renovated village church was still covered with greenery. But the landscape became even more luxurious, because now, after many years, it was ennobled by landscape design. In front of the bishop stood a couple of mature age, but in their hearts each of them was no more than 18. True love knows no age. Behind the married servants of God, Evan and Angelica, stood their 5 children and their family friend Harvey Mickey. In spite of his advanced age, he still ran the village restaurant, and he did it well. Well, now, Harvey Petrovich said at the end of the wedding, and everyone accepted his invitation with pleasure. And again the hall, fragrant with fresh flowers, shouts of Gorko, and wishes of love and happiness. And then Angelica played on the violin the very melody, with which, in fact, and began the history of this large and united family. Somewhere out there on the earth, Selena was wandering in search of another rich man, and restaurateur Harvey was serving his sentence. And here, in a cozy hall, people enjoyed the atmosphere of happiness and peace. And John and Mallory looked down on them from heaven and were genuinely happy. Now the late entrepreneur John could be at peace. The mansion with the secret would never be sold, and its walls would be voiced by more than one more child's voice. Lucy got up from the table and looked sadly at the photo in the wooden frame. The woman sighed sorrowfully, looking at the picture of their dead son Anthony, and wanted to go to the kitchen to boil the kettle, but suddenly changed her mind. Instead, Lucy went to Anthony's room, which she and her husband had not even cleaned since their son's death. The older woman opened the door and looked around. She walked across the room and sat down at the computer table. A Rubik's Cube caught her eye. The landlady took it in her hands and looked at it thoughtfully. Lucy didn't know yet that today spent in this room would change her and her husband's life when they found the shocking message. She took a few turns on the toy and suddenly found herself immersed in her past. Lucy was born in the countryside and had always dreamed of leaving those places. Even as a child, she made a promise to herself that as soon as she finished school, she would definitely move to the big city. And being a child, she strived to fulfill her wish. To do this, she studied well in school when her peers tried to sneak out of the house to go for a walk. And Lucy, thanks to her dream, graduated from school with a gold medal and then entered the Pedagogical Institute in Moscow. The girl perfectly understood, studying in the first year, that one desire is not enough to stay to live in the metropolis. Lucy realized that after graduating from the institute, she would have to rent housing so as not to return to the village or get successfully married to a guy who lives in this city. And the girl actually met a man who was a Muscovite. Lucy had already finished her first year and she was about to go home for summer vacation, and she decided to take a walk on the sidewalk before leaving. The girl walked thinking about how she would spend her time in the village. She was so thoughtful that she didn't notice a young man who was reading something on the bulletin board. Lucy pushed the guy and immediately stopped. The girl looked at the man in surprise and hesitantly said, "I didn't hurt you." "With your seductive appearance would be better bruised," said the stranger with a smile. "Don't be sly about looks. Who made you think of yourself in a negative way?" The man smiled in surprise. "I have a very ordinary appearance, a potato nose, and I have a lot of pigtails," sadly said the girl, who was really complex about her appearance. When she was at school, she often heard her peers calling her ugly duckling behind her back. "You shouldn't feel that way about yourself. Your freckles look good on you, and your nose is not a potato, but a little upturned, which is also very nice," replied the young man and immediately extended his hand. "My name is John. Let's get acquainted, and I'll tell you right away that I don't bite, and you shouldn't be afraid of me. I'm Lucy. Actually, I was not even scared, but thanks for the warning. It was interesting to hear about it at the beginning of the acquaintance. You're a really beautiful girl, and don't deny it. I'm really, really glad you pushed me and not the other guy. I'll explain why I'm saying this, because if you had pushed the other guy, I wouldn't have had a chance to meet you. Now that we're talking, let's take a walk and you can tell me all about yourself." "I'd like to suggest that we switch to you right away. I don't like to shout," John said. The girl nodded in response. The young people continued their walk together. From a new acquaintance, Lucy learned that the man was 27 years old, was not married, lives with his mother in a 2-room apartment. He works as a programmer in a small firm, likes to swim in the pool and occasionally visit the racetrack. After a while, Lucy said that she had to go to the hostel and John saw the girl off. Before leaving, John asked Lucy for her phone number and promised that he would call her again today. The girl smiled in response and then went to the dormitory. The couple began to meet from that day, but soon Valentina had to leave Washington because the summer vacation began. John begged the girl to stay in the city, but she refused, explaining to the young man that her parents would misunderstand her. On the day of departure, the man standing on the platform made a marriage proposal to the girl and at the same time stretched out a thin wedding ring. And on the same day, the couple kissed for the first time. Lucy responded to John's proposal with consent. Already sitting in the carriage, she thought that now she had the status of a bride, and she was pleased to realize it. The girl left reluctantly because her favorite person remained in Moscow, and she was already sure of her feelings. As soon as Lucy arrived in the village, she immediately informed her parents that she had a fiancé. Her mother and father took the news with joy, and in response wished her daughter happiness. Summer vacation flew by and Lucy returned to Washington, where she was met by John. The young man hugged the girl on the platform and kissed her on the lips. And then the man said, "Today you should rest after the road, so I'll escort you to the dormitory. But tomorrow you should tune up for a trip to my house. I'm going to introduce you to my mom. I warn you that she is a person with a difficult character, so be prepared for everything." "I wish you hadn't said that. I'm starting to get scared." Why don't we wait to meet her? Because we still have time. Why would you be scared? I'll be right here with you. And I can assure you that my mom doesn't bite, so you don't have to be afraid. She's just a very unconventional person, but you'll realize that when you get to know her, everything will be just fine. Don't worry. The next day, John came to pick up the girl and they went to his house. Lucy was very worried about meeting her future mother-in-law. Before entering the apartment, she looked critically at herself in a small mirror and then asked the chosen one about her appearance. The man laughed in response and complimented her that she was his most beautiful bride. John opened the door with his key and invited the guest to pass. Lucy timidly stepped over the threshold, and soon a woman in a businesslike black Antonimo walked out to her. The man immediately smiled and said softly, "Mammy, here's Lucy. I told you a lot about her. Now let's get acquainted. My name is Betty." "Yes, son, you told a lot about her, but you forgot to add that this person is a bad girl. I never knew my son had such bad taste." Lucy, hearing this, swallowed nervously and turned silently to the boy. Meanwhile, the young man looked seriously at his mother and, clearly minting each word, said, "I asked you not to be rude, and we seem to have agreed with you. Why are you scaring my fiancée from the doorstep? She scares anyone with her looks. I can see why you didn't want to show me a picture of that ugly girl. And from what I understand, you proposed to her too. You're such a fast rider. Did you remember to tell her you're a lover of women's skirts? Lucy is the most beautiful girl in the world to me, and I love her. And you, Mom, you should respect my choices. And what women's skirts are you talking about? I'd assume we have a proper introduction, not an argument from the get-go," John said clearly. "You said she was a country girl. Where are you going to take her after the wedding? Do you think I'm going to let her stay with us?" "You will not wait," said the landlady sternly, and then turned her gaze to the girl and mockingly said to her, "You decided to get a Moscow residence permit to get my son's brainwashing. Do not be deceived. John is a man in love, and in a couple of weeks he will forget your name. Jesus, what kind of thrift store do you pick up your clothes at? It's so last century." Lucy felt her face turning red and tears welling up in her eyes. The girl forced herself to answer, "You don't even know me, and you speak so rudely. I am ashamed of your behavior in front of your son." After these words, Lucy turned around and left the apartment. She went downstairs and cried to tears. The girl could not think that she could be met by the mother of her chosen one. Lucy tried to hold back her tears, but she couldn't, and then she felt the man's arms around her. She pulled her hands away from her face and saw John, who spoke softly to her. "I'm sorry about Mom. I warned you she wasn't an easy person. Mom overreacted today, but wait, she'll change later. Everything will be fine, and you and she will get along great. Yeah, Betty and I are never gonna get along. You saw and heard exactly what she said. I could imagine all sorts of things, but to be so insulting on first meeting her. Your mother will never bless you to marry me. Then you don't need a blessing. It'll work out. In fact, let's go for a walk, go to a cafe and sit there. You and I have a lot to talk about, like how we're gonna get married. Don't forget that you are my fiancé, and the other day we will go to apply," John said, and began to shower the girl's face with tender kisses. A few days later, the couple filed an application in the registry office. Lucy started a conversation with the groom about his mother, but the chosen one immediately transferred the conversation to another topic. The girl could only guess that the future mother-in-law does not want to deal with her, and this circumstance was very disturbing to her. After the application was filed, several days passed, and Lucy approached the groom about the wedding. She asked where the event would be celebrated. John offered the girl to choose a cafe herself. Lucy laughed in response and then made a thoughtful face and quietly said, "I understand that you don't want to talk to me about your mother, but now please don't dodge the answer. Is Betty still as hostile to me? She doesn't want to see me again. I'll be honest, Mom doesn't want to hear about you at all. She even said she's not coming to the wedding. She divorced my dad because of her temper. Dad's not alive now, though. What are we going to do with you? I don't know what to tell my parents. They're going to want to meet my sister-in-law, and she won't even come to the wedding. What am I supposed to tell my mom and dad? My parents are going to come to the wedding from the village. I'll tell my mother-in-law and father-in-law. Don't worry about that. We have other things to think about right now. Finding a cheap studio apartment to move into. You realize I'm not inviting you to live with me, although you can risk living with me. But I'm afraid that you can't stand 5 minutes with my mom, said the interlocutor. Oh, whoa. No, and I don't even want to risk it. I'm already starting to panic at the memory of meeting Betty, the girl said nervously, shrugging her shoulders. I understand, but she's my mom, so please don't be angry with her. Perhaps time will pass, and she will change her anger into mercy. She has no one but me. You know very well that you can't change a person at this age. I can even say that because of her character she has no friends. Can you imagine how hard her life is? It's hard for me to imagine because I'm not that kind of person. And when I have a son who wants to meet his fiancée, I'll never behave that way. And don't worry, I'll always treat Betty with respect. She gave you life and you are my happiness, which I love dearly. Time flew by quickly and the long-awaited wedding day arrived. There were not many people, as the newlyweds did not have a lot of money to celebrate the solemn day. The girl's parents came to the wedding and stayed in a hotel. The wedding took place. Lucy was over the moon with happiness. The only thing that overshadowed her was that her mother-in-law did not come to the event. The girl hoped to the last that Betty would come to congratulate her only son on such a solemn event, but it did not happen. Immediately after the wedding, the newlyweds rented a one-room apartment. Lucy rejoiced in her happiness. The young woman was actually glad that she had such a wonderful husband who, contrary to the opinion of her mother, took and married her. A year passed after the wedding. During this time, Lucy had never seen her mother-in-law. John visited his mother, and when the wife started talking about his mother, he replied that the parents are all right. Lucy saw how the chosen one is worried that his mother cannot reconcile with the fact that he married a country girl. The young woman even offered John to go and talk to Betty to them both. However, the lover pronounced, I don't see the point of it. She even about you does not give me anything to say. What conversation are you talking about? Well, let's not talk about sad things. What are you going to feed me? Meatless soup again. I've told you several times I'm gonna get a job. Like scrubbing floors, you realize we don't have enough money for food. At least my parents send money once in a while. No work. Study your subjects at the institute. About your parents helping you out. Was that a put down on my part? I don't specifically ask my mother for finances. She should realize that it's hard for you and me to live financially. I want my mom to offer her help from the bottom of her heart. So remember, I'm not going to beg. Honey, I'm not suggesting that you go to Betty. I'm just saying I could have gotten you a job. It was easier for us then. At least we had a penny to spare, she said quietly. We're done talking about work. I'd rather eat and soup without meat or even starve, but I will be calm that I will not steal my beauty from under my nose. Another 6 months passed, and then Lucy felt unwell. From the morning, the young woman was nauseous. She could not understand what was making her sick. The next day, the nausea continued, and it was only here that Lucy thought of a possible pregnancy. She went to the drugstore immediately after a couple at the institute, where she bought a pregnancy test. Once home, the young woman did the necessary procedure, and the test confirmed the pregnancy. Lucy was happy about this event, as she dreamed of a baby, and now she waited for the return of her husband from work to please him. As soon as the spouse came home, the girl hugged her lover and barely audibly reported the pregnancy. John was ecstatic that he would soon become a father. The man, after hearing this, kissed his wife tenderly and said that he wanted to share this news with his mother. Lucy looked at her husband and said, So call and tell her about it. Maybe the birth of the baby will bring Betty and me closer together, because she will become a grandmother. You're right. I'll call her right now. Why don't we go to her house and tell her together? I don't want to risk it. Why don't you do it yourself? Tomorrow's your day off, so go and see your mom. The next day, Lucy waited impatiently for her husband's arrival from her mother. The young woman was worried how Betty would take the news, and only as John appeared at home, she asked a lot of questions to him. The man embraced the chosen one and said, The ice is broken. She congratulated me and you too. Even say more, she invited us to visit. That's very nice. I also notified mine. They congratulate us, the young woman said joyfully. The next day, however, tragedy struck. Lucy's father died. He was hit by a drunk driver. The young woman and her husband immediately left for the village for the funeral. Lucy was very worried about the death of her father, and when the coffin was already lowered into the pit, she felt sick. She woke up in the hospital, where a nurse told her that she had lost consciousness. Lucy anxiously asked about her pregnancy. The woman in a white coat looked sadly at the patient and quietly said, "You lost the baby too. It was not your fault. I know that it is unbearably bad for you now, but you have to hold on. You are still young, and you will soon get pregnant." Lucy covered her face with her hands and cried. She didn't hear the nurse come out, and her husband came in. Her husband sat down on the bed, leaned over, and began to gently kiss her hands. Lucy wanted to scream at this point, but there was a lump in her throat that she couldn't swallow. It was several minutes before the young woman was able to calm down. John, on the other hand, sat next to her and stroked her lover's shoulders. The girl looked at her spouse and quietly asked him, "Do you blame me? What kind of foolishness did you say? No one is not to blame. You had a nervous breakdown. And don't even think about it anymore. A little time will pass and you will get pregnant again. And even more than once, I guarantee you. I love you so much. I love you too, my sunshine. Now let's get some rest." A couple of days later, Lucy was discharged from the hospital, and then she and her husband left for Washington. The young woman was very worried about losing her child. John saw it well and suggested she go to her mother. The man hoped that Betty would support his wife morally in this difficult moment. John received no objection from the chosen one, and so he called his mother. He informed his mother that they wanted to check on her. Betty kindly agreed to host the two of them. At that time, the woman did not yet know that Lucy was no longer pregnant. When John arrived with his spouse at his mom's house, the man took his mother aside and told her under what circumstances his wife had lost the baby. Betty listened to her son and then said in a deliberately loud voice, "Why didn't you tell me this before? You chose a wife who can't even bear a child. I doubted her for a reason." "Mom, why are you talking so loud? I didn't tell you about Lucy's situation on purpose. She needs support at the moment. As a wise woman, you should support her morally. Find the right words, I'm begging you. I changed my attitude to your passport when I found out about the pregnancy, but now I am angry that a simple country girl who cannot bear a child, and you are so hunted," said the landlady loudly. "What an obnoxious person you are." John turned around to go to his wife as Lucy herself approached him. The young woman looked at her mother-in-law and spoke softly. "You spoke so loudly on purpose so that I could hear. You have achieved your goal, I heard you. But you know your words don't offend me at all. I could say a lot of things to you, but I will not, because I promised your son that I will respect you, and I do it only because I promised. But believe me, your words will come back to haunt you. And I don't need your respect. I never dreamed of being respected by the country bumpkins. Wait another year and my son won't need you." The landlady was interrupted by John, who said, "Mom, you're out of line. Lucy is my wife and I won't let you hurt her, even though you're my mother. I am very sorry that I invited my wife to visit you. I hope that you have changed, but I was wrong. You are now with your own hands destroying the relationship with your daughter-in-law, who did nothing bad to you personally." After these words, John took his wife by the hand and pulled her to the exit. The man did not even begin to say goodbye to his mother. Lucy, as soon as she found herself on the street, she cried. The young woman couldn't understand why Betty felt that way about her. John stood nearby at that moment and asked his wife to apologize to his mother for all the words she had said. Lucy, trying to hold back her sobs, said, "Why did she treat me like that? Is it because I was born not in Moscow, but in the countryside? Are villagers any different from city dwellers? They're no different. Stop crying. The most important thing is that we're together. Let's go buy a cake and cheer ourselves up with some sweets." Time slowly moved on, and soon Lucy graduated from the institute and got a job at school as a history teacher. During all this time, the young woman did not meet John's mother and tried not to ask her husband about her. And when there was a phone call from Betty, she was very surprised. She answered and heard the pitiful voice of her mother-in-law. "I'm sick, and I can't reach John. He's not answering. I need to buy some medicine. Call an ambulance if you don't feel well at all. I can't be there for you for at least 2 hours. And John doesn't always answer because he's busy. Should I come to you?" "Yes, and as soon as possible," said Betty. Lucy wasn't particularly keen to go to John's mother's house, but she had no choice. She tried to call her spouse, but the chosen one did not answer. The young woman sighed doubtfully and began to quickly pack. After a while, Lucy was already at Betty's. The landlady was lying on the sofa and took her time explaining to her daughter-in-law what she needed to prepare for dinner. The young woman listened patiently to John's mother and mentally imagined that she would have to stay here for a long time. As soon as Betty gave all the orders, then the girl ran to the pharmacy to get some medicine. On the way back, she got a call from her husband and asked about her mother's health. Lucy, on the move, told everything and asked him to come as soon as possible. John said that he was on his way to them. The young woman came back and immediately handed the medicine to the landlady and then followed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Soon came John, who inquired first of all from his mother about his health and only wanted to greet his spouse, as he was stopped by his mother, who said, "I need help. I called the doctor at home today and they suggested I go to the hospital. And you know how I don't like to lie there, so I need you to stay here until I get better. I realize I'm interfering with your plans, but you have to understand me too. And son, you better tell your date that she'll be living here by my rules. Of course, we'll live with you. Hopefully, you two will probably become friends in the meantime. I'll go tell her you invited me to come here for a while." John went to his wife and told her about his mother's offer. The man thought that his wife would be happy about it. However, it did not happen. Lucy, in response, only sighed heavily. She absolutely did not want to live with her husband's mother, but she understood that it was also impossible to leave a sick woman alone. The next day, Lucy saw her husband off to work in the morning and then began to get ready herself. The girl went to the mirror and began to tint her eyelashes as she heard Betty calling her. The daughter-in-law headed towards the sick woman and approached and asked, "Did you call for me?" "Yes. If you want to talk to someone on the phone, please come out to the landing. You were talking to your mother yesterday and I had to wait for you to finish your conversation, and the time, by the way, was already 10 o'clock in the evening, and I'm falling asleep at that time." "But I was talking softly and even more so with my mother," the girl said, perplexed. "I have my own routine and I'm not going to change it. I'm used to having silence at home, and if there's any chatter, it's only the TV, and that's when I need it. Are you saying that if your son calls, I have to go to the stairwell too?" "Don't be silly. I'm just letting you know that I like silence, so I'm telling you that too," the landlady said haughtily. "Okay, I heard you. What else am I not supposed to do while we're living here?" Lucy asked, barely containing her irritation. "Listen to me. Yes, and I forgot to tell you that in the morning I eat only freshly cooked oatmeal, so tomorrow before work," Betty replied. Lucy felt a wave of indignation coming over her. After all, only last night she had asked what to cook in the morning, then she was told that she could boil at her discretion. So Lucy fried scrambled eggs, and this morning there was already a statement about porridge. The young woman went to work in a bad mood. She imagined how unbearably difficult it would be for her to tolerate all sorts of such remarks from her mother-in-law. Lucy mentally prayed to God that Betty would recover as soon as possible and she and her husband would return to their rented accommodation. It had been 7 days since John's mother had been ill. During this time, Lucy had heard many caustic remarks from the old woman. However, the girl stoically endured all reproaches and did not try to enter into a dialogue with the landlady. She was even able to bear a barbed reproach from Betty that she had not been able to get pregnant for so long. The topic of children was especially painful for Lucy because in fact she and her husband had nothing. And the young woman had already been repeatedly examined together with John, but the doctors spread their hands and said that everything was fine with their health. Betty knew about it from her son, and the old woman did not hesitate to jab her daughter-in-law with it. A few more days passed and John's mother reported that she was much better. For Lucy, this news was a delight. The young woman breathed a sigh of relief, because now finally the nightmare that she does everything wrong and through the stump will be over. The young woman immediately packed her things and offered her husband to leave the same day. John looked at his spouse with surprise and said, "Let's live a few more days. It seemed to me that you and my mother found common ground. I even wanted to offer you to live here, so we can save money. You seem to think we were friends with your mom. I don't want to be bullied every day anymore. You can stay, but I'm leaving right now." "What's gotten into you?" All right, we'll do it tonight, but don't be so nervous. We don't need to fight over nothing, John said, perplexed. It may be nothing to you, but it's not to me. I'm exhausted from living here. I promised you I wouldn't stir up trouble with Betty, and I kept that promise. Your mother hasn't heard a swear word from me, but believe me, I'm not an Iron Man and my patience can run out too. Okay, calm down. Tonight is tonight. Let's do it quietly, the man said dejectedly. The couple returned to their rented apartment and life went on. As the years passed, Lucy was still unable to get pregnant. She often looked at her students and mentally asked the Almighty to give her the opportunity to become a mom at least once. But time passed and her wish was not fulfilled. Valentina was repeatedly called by her mother and constantly asked when she would give her a grandson or granddaughter. These conversations drove her to sobs, and then her husband began to stick to a bottle of white. The woman realized that the years were flying by and her spouse was desperate that they had no children and started drinking alcoholic beverages. And once again, when her husband came in a drunken state, Lucy, with tears in her eyes, said, "I can't go on like this. Why are you torturing yourself? Let's get a divorce. Maybe with another woman you will have a full-fledged family. I just can't bear to see you binge on hard liquor. I'd had enough of your mother's lecture that I can't give you in here, and you found solace in a bottle of white water. Why don't I do the same? Let's leave this ridiculous conversation till tomorrow," the man said, twisting his words, and without taking off his jacket, he fell on the sofa. Lucy burst into tears. She realized that it was not necessary to start this conversation at the moment, as her husband was in a deranged state and would not remember anything tomorrow. The woman decided that she would continue this conversation in the morning. The next day was a day off, and Lucy brewed coffee and sat down in the kitchen, waiting for the awakening of the chosen one. Soon John got up and joined his wife. The man, as always, apologized for his behavior and poured himself a glass of milk. Lucy immediately suggested to him to get a divorce. The husband emptied the glass in a few gulps and said softly, "What kind of nonsense are you telling me? What divorce? I don't need any other woman besides you. I chose you and I will never give up. Yes, I do not hide that addicted to strong drinks and need to stop with this case. But I also want to tell you that it's time for us to go on a vacation. Why don't we go to the seaside this summer? How about it?" I don't know what to say. Maybe you're right and we need a change of scenery because we're completely exhausted. The sea is the sea. But if you go on strong drinks, then honestly our union will come to an end and we will divorce, as it is impossible to live like this. A month later, the couple went to the sea, where they had a wonderful time. Back Lucy, even in Washington, was not particularly eager to go, but the spouse was running out of vacation. And soon the couple returned to the capital, and just a short time later, Lucy learned about her pregnancy. The woman could not believe that her wish had come true. She held in her hands a test, which clearly showed 2 blue stripes. Lucy was already anticipating that very soon she would become a mom and hold her baby in her arms. As soon as her husband came home from work, Lucy announced her pregnancy in a low voice. The man shook his head and asked why she decided so, and then she solemnly handed him the test. John turned the result in his hands and for some reason whispered, "What if this test is a lie? There's no such thing, but it's possible. Run and buy another one and then you will be 100% sure. Only buy another company," said the happy woman. The man, having heard the request of his wife, rushed to fulfill it unconditionally, and literally in 20 minutes handed his wife the test. The woman immediately went to the bathroom, where she did the necessary procedure. And soon she came out and proudly handed over a second test, which also clearly showed blue stripes. John was unspeakably happy and began to circle the chosen one around the room. When the first joy passed, the head of the family immediately suggested that his wife quit her job. Lucy looked at him with bewilderment and asked, "Why on earth should I stop working?" "So you do not worry about your students for nothing. We cannot take risks. I need to make sure that you are not nervous, and I will be calm in the case when you stay at home." "You're talking nonsense. I don't get nervous at school. You better think about how you're going to tell your mother about this. Tomorrow, I'll go and check on her and tell her the good news. Let our old lady to rejoice, because she constantly harasses me when I divorce and find another woman," half jokingly, half seriously said the husband. "Betty and his repertoire. How many years have we lived, and she has never accepted me as her daughter-in-law, she replied with a laugh. The next day, Lucy knew that her husband would be late after work because he would visit his mother. Therefore, the woman was not particularly worried and did not wait for the imminent return of the chosen one. However, the doorbell rang and Lucy went to open the door. Lucy was surprised to see John with her mother on the doorstep. Lucy only wanted to ask something, but she was prevented from doing so by Betty, who held out her hands and said, "Come here and I'll give you a hug. My son called me this morning and told me the news. I asked him to wait for me at work, and here we have made you a pleasant surprise. We're standing in front of you. By the way, I even bought a cake to celebrate. You've amazed me so much, I don't know what to say. You seem to me an impregnable fortress, and now deign for so many years to come to our rented apartment," embarrassed daughter-in-law said. "Well, do not grumble, or I'll change grace to anger. I actually am with a proposal to you. Enough of you from house to house jumping. Why don't you just move in with me? I think we can still get along. I promise you, sister-in-law, that I'll be more cooperative. But you must listen to me," said Betty. "You never cease to amaze me today. I feel as if the world has completely turned upside down," Lucy said, a little frightened, and then suggested that they continue the conversation in the kitchen. A month later, the couple moved in with Betty. Lucy was not very eager to move in with her mother-in-law, as she did not believe that a person could change overnight. At first, there were clashes between the women, but over time, Lucy got used to communicating with the landlady. By the time of childbirth, she even called her mother-in-law Mom, which pleased her husband. Soon a strong baby was born, which the couple named Anthony. The boy grew up an active and healthy child. Lucy with pleasure fiddled with the child. It gave her pleasure to watch how the Sonny every day makes new achievements in life. When Anthony was 3 years old, he was put in kindergarten, so that the boy learned to communicate with peers. Betty was against it, but the parents insisted on their own, and never regretted their decision, as the kid told with passion about the time spent in kindergarten, and reported all the details of the boy, desperately gesticulating, which often made adults laugh. The years slowly flew by. Anthony's parents continued to work. The boy went to kindergarten, from where he was alternately taken then Betty and Lucy. Mother-in-law with special care treated her grandson, which is very unspeakably pleased daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law was worried for one thing, that the landlady would pass on to her son her bad habits. So the woman often said to her husband, "Maybe you talk to your mother and ask her to say less obscenities in front of the child." "What nonsense are you talking about? Look at the way Anthony's reaching out to his grandmother. I get the feeling he's more interested in my mother than his own parents. That's what I'm afraid that my son, when he grows up, will start calling me a country bumpkin," said the wife arrogantly. However, time moved forward quietly, and Lucy noted that the mother-in-law is actually great with her grandson. The old woman turned out to be a born inventor. She, together with Anthony, made various fakes out of various improvised materials, which were then taken to the kindergarten. When Anthony was 7 years old, Harry's mother died suddenly. The son was very worried about the absence of a native person. Lucy also mourned the passing of her mother-in-law. She had grown close to Betty over the past few years and was quite accustomed to taking caustic jokes in her address. Time flew by imperceptibly, and soon Anthony finished school and was preparing to enter a higher institution. The young man dreamed of following in his mother's footsteps and working as a teacher of algebra and geometry. Parents approved of their son's choice. Anthony soon entered the institute. The boy studied for 6 months and came home in a pensive mood. The mother immediately noticed this state in her son, so she politely asked what had happened. The young man hesitantly said in reply, "I think I have fallen in love." "That's wonderful. I just hope that you are not going to go to the registry office tomorrow." "Mom, you're being ironic, but I'm being serious. I can't get that girl out of my head." We met in a cafe. She was drinking a milkshake alone and looking sadly out the window. I admired her profile and came over to meet her. When Sarah turned to me, on the second part of her face, I immediately saw a scar that stretched from her temple to the middle of her cheek. I purely involuntarily flinched, and the girl grinned and turned away from me again. I felt like an idiot at that moment, because I had made it clear to Sarah that her face was disfigured. I stood there silently for a few minutes, not knowing what to do, and after a while she just told me to leave. It was only after that I could offer to meet her, because I couldn't just walk away. And what happened next? The mother asked with interest. Mom, you asked such a childish question. Naturally, acquaintance, Sarah told me about herself, and I in turn about myself. Then we just went for a walk, and I walked her home. We've been talking for almost a month now, and only now I realized that this person is very dear to me, my son said thoughtfully. You need to pull everything out of you. Why don't you tell about your chosen one? Who she is, where she studies, what kind of family? Answered the mother and looked at her son carefully after this phrase. The young man only wanted to answer as his father returned from the store. John walked into the room and looked at his household. The head of the family said in astonishment, "What's going on here? I must have missed something, because you are sitting in silence and Anthony is not rushing to the evening walk, as he has been doing lately. The guy thinks his parents have gotten older and they are watching with redoubled interest at their offspring's behavior." John, you missed a lot, namely the story of our son's feelings for a young lady, but our boy did not have time to tell us much about the girl, because your arrival cut him off at half a word, replied his wife with a smile. Very interesting. Anthony, let me sit next to you and listen to who my son fell in love with. You are not a young man anymore, and you know what to say to the fair sex only in one case, when you are sure of your feelings, John said and looked at the boy without any smile. Anthony gathered his courage and told his mother and father about his beloved. From the narration, the parents learned that the girl works as a salesperson in a cell phone store. Sarah is 19 years old and lives with her grandmother. The chosen one of the son of her parents does not remember her parents since they died when she was 6 years old. The girl was raised by her maternal grandmother. Lucy, after her son's story, asked him when he was going to bring Sarah to meet her. It was as if the boy had been waiting for this question and immediately promptly replied that he planned to do it tomorrow. The woman nodded in response and said that she should think of something special to make for tomorrow then. Shortly after this conversation, Anthony left to meet his lover, and Lucy turned to her husband. Don't you think that our boy is a little early for a serious relationship? Because he only recently turned 19 years old. How old were you when you fell in love with me? I was the same age, laughingly replied the head of the family. You are wrong and not serious. Perhaps you forgot that girls grow up before guys, so you gave an example of an unfortunate situation. It just seems to me that your son is still just a first crush, not real feelings. Why haven't you talked to him alone about it? We don't have to guess and guess now. Time will tell. And now let's think about what you will cook interesting on the occasion of acquaintance with the beloved son, calmly replied the husband. Lucy jokingly threatened her husband with her fist and began to list her specialties, which she was good at in particular. John listened to his wife, and when she said about the duck stuffed with apples, he immediately stopped her. The wife laughed and threatened her fist again, adding, "You always choose duck, as a big meat eater and our son all in you went to taste. Then tomorrow we'll see if Anthony's taste is the same from the looks of it. I've been in love with one person for many years," the head of the family said with a laugh. As soon as Lucy heard this, she immediately became serious. The woman told her husband about the scar on her face and asked his husband not to look at Sarah at the first meeting, so as not to embarrass her, as his son did at the first meeting. John did not contradict his spouse and agreed. The man only asked how the girl got this scar. The wife did not answer, as she did not know anything about it. After the conversation with the chosen one, Lucy thought about it. She perfectly remembered her first acquaintance with her late mother-in-law and how much she worried then. Therefore, the woman decided for herself that in no way would not let her son's chosen one realize that she cared about the girl's appearance. Lucy would not want to cause Anthony's beloved the same suffering that she received in the distant past from John's mother. The next day, the acquaintance took place. Lucy, as promised to her husband, baked a duck in the oven and cooked mashed potatoes as a side dish. The head of the family bought a carrot top cake for the occasion. And when Anthony and the girl came, the festive table was already set. Lucy politely asked the guests minor questions about work hobbies. The chosen one of her son tactfully answered and behaved quite appropriately. Sarah tried not to be embarrassed when she occasionally threw glances at her, but the girl hardly managed it. She no and became crimson. Lucy felt genuinely sorry for the guest at this point, and she decided to help her get rid of her embarrassment. The older woman turned to Sarah. I can see that you are very worried. I can see that with the naked eye, and I can guess why you're doing this because of your scar. But let me tell you that my husband and I, for example, are attracted not by a charming appearance, but by the soul of a person. So don't be embarrassed when we look at you. Very soon I think we will become friends and you will understand my words. Sarah, nervously at the phrase of the interlocutor, rubbed the edge of her blouse. The girl felt that she was blushing again and it made her uncomfortable. And then the guest suddenly spoke. Yes, I have a disfigured face, but it's not my fault. It just always seems to me that when people look at me closely, they either mock me in their hearts or pity me immensely, and I don't want that at all. And maybe you're right that we'll become friends. I'd like that too, but it's too early to tell. Nobody's accusing you of anything, and they're not going to. Our son likes you, and that's the most important thing. And take my word for it that my husband and I are not going to mock you. Lucy tactfully replied and slid a plate with a cake to the girl, suggesting that she start eating the sweet treat. Thank you, but I'm really full of your duck, which is cooked just marvelously. My grandmother cannot bake, so I'll be sure to get your recipe. And now, not to go back to the scar, I'll tell you about it in a nutshell, because I know you'll ask about it in the future. It happened a year ago when I was coming home from a friend's house. It was the beginning of 10 in the evening. The time was still late, and I was walking calmly, as in one of the alleyways to me jumped two guys. One of the thugs had a broken bottle in his hand, and like any other girl, I screamed out loud in fright. One of the guys started tearing my blouse, and the other one told me to shut up with the bottle. But I was not going to give up so easily and kept on screaming. And then one of the bandits slashed me in the face with a bottle, and then I vaguely remember. I saw several strong men who rushed to my rescue, and I woke up in the hospital when my cheek was stitched up. Since then, I'd had this scar in my memory. I'll tell you right away that those scumbags were caught. There was a trial and they received a prison sentence. But I just do not feel better about it. You know, a scar doesn't just disappear. That's my story. The head of the family sat with his spouse and son and listened to the guest's story in silence. The first to break the silence was Lucy, who tried to cheer up Sarah with words. Don't worry, it's all behind you now. And the scar is nothing to worry about. You just think about what these hooligans could do. The main thing is that they were punished and are responsible for it, and in the near future will not do such things. And in general, let's talk about positive topics. I suggest that you write down the recipe for cooking duck so that your grandmother can feed you deliciously on any of the holidays. Sarah stayed a while longer and then went home. Anthony warned his parents that he would see the girl off and be a little late. The mother waved back with a smile, and as soon as the front door closed behind her son, she immediately turned to her husband with a question about whether he liked Anthony's girlfriend. The husband was silent for a while, and then answered, I saw in her quite an adequate and reasonable person. She is not broken, as now likes to communicate with the current youth. She has no gesture and other feminine things. In general, I can't say anything bad about the girl at this stage of acquaintance. What do you think about it? Sarah seemed vulnerable to me, but maybe that's a misleading first impression. You know, the most important thing for you and me is that they love and respect each other. That's the only way they can both build a strong family down the road. Like you said, time will tell. Let's wait and see. A couple of months passed after the meeting. During this time, Anthony managed to get acquainted with the grandmother of the chosen one and to get her favor. Sarah visited her lover a couple more times, and Lucy already clearly realized that the young people are going to soon start living together. As here, Anthony came home gloomy and reported that he broke up with a girl. The mother of the guy looked at her son in bewilderment and asked him to explain himself. Anthony replied that he did not want to talk about this topic at the moment. The woman did not bother her son with questions. She decided that the guy himself will tell everything when the time comes. However, a week passed, and Anthony still came home after school and did not go anywhere else. Lucy again tried to talk to her son about Sarah, but Anthony again avoided answering. And then the woman turned to her husband to talk to the native child man to man. The woman told her husband, You are a father, and maybe your boy will confess everything that they have with the girl happened there. You see how he suffers. I just heart breaks from worrying about him." That same evening, John came into his son's room and said softly that he was worried about Anthony and Sarah, adding that his mother was nervous. Anthony asked his father to change the topic of conversation, but the head of the family was adamant and made it clear to his son, until he hears the answers to his questions, he will not go anywhere. Meanwhile, Lucy sat in the hall and waited for the end of the conversation. The woman was actually worried about the emotional state of her child. She even wanted to go to the door to overhear the dialogue between the two men, but immediately forced herself to throw such an idea out of her thoughts. Soon John came out of his son's room and went to the kitchen. His wife hurried after him, and only there the woman with anxiety in her voice said, "Come on, tell me quickly. I already thought that you sat down to watch a soccer match there, that you were so long. You could have wrapped up the conversation faster, so that I'm not nervous here." What can I tell you? Sarah was a jealous girl. She used to give Anthony a hard time for looking at another girl, for getting a phone call from a classmate. In the end, all this bored Anthony and he proposed to break up. Sarah got the idea and doesn't make contact anymore. That's our son walking around like a black cloud. It's a corny story, and I don't even have a comment on it. Whoa, wait, but Anthony's really committed to Sarah, and it shows. You need to talk to the girl, make it clear that it's stupid to be jealous over nothing. You probably didn't realize there was a way to reconcile through conversation. You need to get the girl's phone number from your son. You can see how he's suffering. You're an interesting woman, and if Anthony does not want to give Sarah's number, then what do you propose me to force the numbers out of him? You're not a stupid man. The first gray hair has already appeared. You just have to find such words that Anthony gave you Sarah's number and do it today, because I want to meet the girl tomorrow. The man looked at his wife with an incomprehensible look. However, Lucy frowned her eyebrows, which meant that her wife would not back down. John again went to his son's room and after a while returned and handed his wife a piece of paper on which the girl's number was written down. Lucy called Sarah from work the next day and asked for a meeting. The girl did not refuse, and soon they were both sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee. Anthony's mother first asked the interlocutor how she was doing, and then said without preamble, "I know that you are in quarrel with my son, and the reason for your separation is also known. Can I ask you why you think Anthony is unfaithful to you? I just want you to be honest with me, because I don't like falseness in communication. I'm tired of him looking at other girls when we're out walking, and how many times he gets a call from Julia, and she's always sweet-talking him. Do you think that's normal? I, for one, don't like it." I told him about it repeatedly, but he paid no attention and I'm tired of it. Sarah replied indignantly, "But wait, girl, all that you just reported, it is not a fact that Anthony has other relationships. He's probably getting a call from a classmate, and they're obviously talking about school. Just realize that you can't just jump the gun like that. You need to meet and express your grievances with each other. That's the only way you'll be able to reach an understanding. And I can see that you're completely ignoring Anthony. Maybe it's not because you're jealous, but because you don't like him anymore and you're just cold to him. I find it offensive when my young man walks next to me and looks at blondes or brunettes. I don't know what Anthony told you, but it's not my fault we broke up. And I didn't get cold to him. I just have my own female pride, which I won't let anyone trample on," the girl said with tears in her eyes. "You calm down now. Let's make a deal with you so that I will talk to my son, and then you both sit down peacefully at the negotiating table. It's just that I can see how Anthony's suffering, and so can you. How did you ever envision a life together after that? Realize that everything is not smooth. There must be bumps, and only a woman with her cunning can completely tame a man. Are you willing to accept this offer to meet Anthony?" "Okay, but only on one condition, that he turns first," Sarah replied quietly. Lucy returned home later than usual that day. The husband knew that his wife would have a conversation with the girl, but Anthony was surprised to see his mother coming home from work much later. The boy looked at his mother questioningly. The woman knew perfectly well what she wanted to ask her son, and only Anthony wanted to ask the question, as Lucy softly spoke. "I went out with your girlfriend. Isn't it funny to you that you two loving people are pissing each other off over nothing? You're giving her a reason to be jealous and she's falling for it. Why do you look at other girls when you're out with her? For example, I wouldn't like it if your father looked at Masha, Klava, or Sveta while walking with me. Stop it, Mom. I only once looked at a girl. I thought it was my former classmate and explained it to Sarah, but she doesn't want to hear anything. She made a tragedy out of this isolated incident, and about Letha calling, it's a disaster. My classmate and I just talked. There are no taboo topics. Okay, son, call your girlfriend and try to talk. I don't have anything else to advise you. Anthony answered his mother with an affirmative nod, and at the same moment he got ready and went out. Lucy guessed that her son had gone to Sarah to talk to her. The woman mentally wished the boy good luck, and only then reported her conversation to her husband, who was patiently waiting for news from his wife. The young man made up with his beloved and was again always in good spirits. Lucy was sincerely happy for her son. However, the joy was short-lived. After a couple of months again, there was a conflict situation and the young people quarreled. The reason for the spat was again Sarah's jealousy. Anthony's mother did not know how to establish relations between young people. Lucy even went to talk to the girl's grandmother to influence her granddaughter. And when a gaunt old woman opened the door to her, she immediately introduced herself and said, "Why? I'm Anthony's mom and I'd like to talk to you, Natalie, about Sarah. Maybe you could have a conversation with your granddaughter. I mean, they love each other, but they can't get along. Sarah's always picking on the guy, and the guy freaks out and walks around like a black cloud with no mood. Yeah, I've talked to my granddaughter and Anthony, but it's all to no avail. I can only assume that Sarah is complex about her looks, and that's why she's acting like this. And Anthony can't say no to Julia, who's always calling. I've already advised them not to talk to each other for a while and to take a break from each other or to start living together, but they agree and then they fight," Natalie said. "It's like a vicious circle. Thank you for keeping up with our sweet couple, but sometimes it seems to me that in the near future, they will just run away and hate each other," sadly said the guest and left Natalie's apartment. The woman was disappointed after the conversation, as she had hoped that the two of them and Sarah's grandmother would find a way out of the difficult situation, but it did not happen. Quarrels and reconciliation of young people continued for a year, and at some point Lucy stopped believing that her son and his chosen one would create a family in the future, which she directly told Anthony. "You're just torturing yourselves. You cannot get along. Run away completely already. I don't have enough fingers to count the number of times you've gotten back together in a year. It's an outrage neither of you wants to give in to each other. You also cannot understand that we adults are worried about you, and you are all playing games." The young man listened attentively and then looked seriously at his mother and calmly said, "We will not make up again. The last quarrel is a fiasco. Talking about jealousy was only an excuse to break off the relationship. We had a calm talk with her yesterday, and she admitted that she has a boyfriend on the side that she likes. And you know, Mom, I'm not going to form a love triangle, so I wished her happiness and a long life. Don't worry, there won't be any more reconciliation. What am I, after all, a little kid to be fooled around like this? I definitely run out of patience. I find it hard to believe that Sarah would turn out to be such a two-faced person. Although maybe she said it to piss you off, to make you jealous. I'm not interested in that anymore. If she said it to piss you off, she got what she wanted and more. I just don't want to talk to her. Son, don't worry, you'll meet the only one who will make you happy. Look at your classmate Letha, who calls you a lot. I think she has a soft spot for you. Now I want to be without any relationship. So let's not talk about this topic for a while, and especially do not call me the name Sarah. I do not want to know anything about her." Time moved on leisurely. Soon Anthony's parents retired, and he finished his studies at the institute and got a job at the school where his mother had taught before. During this time, the young man tried to arrange a personal life with two girls, but he did not succeed. About Sarah, Anthony never again remembered and did not start a conversation about her. Lucy now dreamed of her son finding a woman and becoming a family man. She often started talking to Anthony about it, but the guy only joked about it. And so when the woman once again started a conversation about family, the young man suddenly interrupted his mother and asked, "Where can you get a large sum of money?" "Strange question. In the bank at interest," replied the mother. "I see. What was the question about? You never asked just like that," the elderly woman said, perplexed. "All Mammy changed the subject," the boy said sharply. Since that day, Lucy noticed that her son again comes home without mood. The woman thought that most likely there were problems on the personal front again. She tried to talk to Anthony, forced to talk to her son and her husband, but all attempts to find out the cause of the disgusting mood were unsuccessful. It had been a month since Anthony was often late after work and came in quite late. Lucy was very worried about her son. Her female intuition suggested that the boy had some serious problems, but he did not want to worry his parents. And when the son came home with a black eye, the mother sounded the alarm and nervously turned to Anthony. "And this is you telling me that you are doing well?" "No, son. You're going to talk to me today, and I'm not going to let you go. You can take my word for it. Maybe you're seeing a married woman or someone's taking money out of you. Just say the word, and your father and I will go straight to the police. Let the law enforcement agencies take care of it. That's what they're for, to restore order in the country. Mommy, please don't worry. I'm not dating a married lady, and no one is extorting money from me. Just today, I ran into some juvenile hooligans, so I had to teach them a little politeness. I myself, of course, got a little, but they did not seem a little. I don't like this. You become secretive, my boy, and my motherly heart can't just go away. It's better to tell everything honestly, and together we will solve the problem." However, the young man did not answer his mother, but only affectionately embraced the woman and went to his room. Lucy sighed heavily and mentally asked the Lord that everything would get better in Anthony's life. After that, a couple of days passed, and now the woman once again waited for her son's return. The time was already showing the 12th hour of the night. The head of the family approached his wife and suggested going to bed, but she refused. Lucy knew that occasionally her son did not come home at night, but the guy always warned about it in advance. And on this day, Anthony did not call, and his mother could not reach him either. All night, the old woman didn't sleep a wink. She looked out the window for the figure of her son, who was not there. John saw how her spouse was worried and tried to support her morally, saying that everything would be fine. But in this, the head of the family was mistaken. Anthony did not return in the next day. Lucy called the school where her son worked, but she received the answer that Anthony did not come to the educational institution in the morning. The woman was in a panic because previously their boyfriend had never allowed himself to do such a thing. The sorrowful event came a day later. Lucy received a call from an unknown number, and a person introduced himself as an investigator. The law enforcement representative said that they found a male body with documents in the name of Anthony. The woman listened to the investigator and could not understand what this man wanted from her. Then the husband picked up the phone and asked questions. "What is your reason for calling? What do you need?" "You need to come to the morgue to identify the body," the investigator replied. "Are you all crazy?" "What body?" John shouted indignantly. At the other end of the phone, they repeated the name that was on the passport and insistently suggested to come to the morgue. John wrote down the address and looked at his wife, who was waiting for clarification from her husband. The man swallowed the lump that stood in his throat and barely audibly said, "We are in grief. I think our son is no longer in this world." The investigator called and said only that. "We need to identify the body, and they are already waiting for us there. We have to get ready." As soon as Lucy heard that, she sank to the floor and sobbed helplessly. The husband rushed to the medicine cabinet, where he quickly dribbled the sedative and offered his wife to drink the medicine. The woman uncomplainingly complied with the request, while still sobbing convulsively. John persuaded his wife to calm down, and when he realized that she was unable to go to the identification, he invited a neighbor to sit with Valia while he was absent. Soon the man identified the body of his son, and then answered a number of questions from the investigator. And only after that John asked how his Anthony died. The law enforcement officer said that the body was found by a janitor in a back alley, and called the police. And then the investigator added that Anthony died from multiple stab wounds at the scene. The man nodded in response and asked another question. "Tell me, did they find these scumbags?" Neighbors were interviewed, but they could not find any witnesses to the crime. And the janitor did not say anything clear, "But we continued to work," replied the uniformed worker. John returned home grief-stricken. He could not imagine how he would tell his wife all this. The elderly man entered the apartment and saw that no one was there. He rushed to a neighbor, who told him that his wife had been hospitalized. Her heart was bad. John immediately went to the hospital, where he remained seated until evening. The doctor tried to send the man home to rest for the night and then come back again, but Lucy's husband refused flatly. He was afraid that this day he would also lose his wife. The next morning, John was allowed to visit his wife and was strictly instructed not to tell her any disturbing news. The man looked perplexed at the doctor and asked, "What am I supposed to say about our boy since he is not alive? She will definitely ask me about it. In your case, I would deceive my wife, because any excitement can end tragically for Lucy. As soon as your wife is better, you will tell her. For now, just say that the body is not your son's," the doctor replied politely. John entered the room where his wife was lying. She turned towards her husband and asked in a whisper, "This is not our son, is it?" "No, sweetheart. The police got the wrong person. I want you to hang in there and be strong, and we'll give Anthony a beating when he gets here. So call him. Maybe he's home already." With hope in her voice, said the patient. John promised to call, and after a while he went home. Now the man thought about when and under what circumstances to tell the truth to his wife. It was impossible to postpone the funeral for a long time, and how long his wife will stay in the hospital is completely unknown. The doctors did not give certain predictions. But guessing and inventing an elderly man did not have to. All his lies were revealed the next day when he came to check on his wife. Lucy asked if her son had come, and in response, she saw her husband look away. The elderly woman immediately guessed everything. She screamed. The medical staff came running, and the visitor was asked to leave the room. John sat in the corridor and waited for the doctor to come out to find out about his wife's condition. The doctor came out of the room and said that now the woman was given a sedative injection and she would fall asleep. The elderly man thanked the medical worker and stayed waiting in the hospital. He wanted to talk to his wife before he started the funeral arrangements. After a while, Lucy regained consciousness and her spouse came in to see her. The woman lay staring at the ceiling, tears rolling from her eyes, which she did not wipe away. The man sat down next to her and stroked her arm, and then softly said, "I know you don't have time for me right now, but you need to think about the funeral. I am also very sad, like you, but we must pull ourselves together and be strong for the sake of our son's memory." And then Lucy interrupted her husband. She whispered, "You're not a stupid man and you'll organize everything in a Christian way. Only be sure to agree with the doctor to let me go to see my boy to his last journey. And now you leave me. I want to be alone to put my thoughts in order." The husband nodded silently and gently kissed his wife on the cheek. Leaving the room, he turned to the nurse and asked the girl in a white coat to look after his chosen one. The man was very worried that his beloved could do something to herself, so he asked the nurse. Sometime later, the funeral took place, where there were a lot of people. Many good words were said in honor of the deceased and many flowers and wreaths were laid. Lucy stood beside her husband, who supported her under the elbow. The woman looked at the grave mound and cried silently. She realized that she would never hear Anthony's voice again and he would never kiss her tenderly on the cheek. The old woman sat in Anthony's room and rubbed the Rubik's Cube, remembering her life. She was distracted from thinking by the voice of her husband, who came in quietly and quietly said, "Decided to sorrow a little alone? I'm looking for you, and you're in your son's room. You know, John, you and I kept everything in Anthony's room. Why don't we clean it up? We're old men waiting to grow old alone, and we got nothing better to do, so we'll clean it up. And we'll remember how we raised our Anthony. Maybe it'll make us feel a little better. Oh, look, here's his favorite Jack London book. My son has loved this writer since he was a child, and as an adult, he still reads this author from time to time. How nice it is to hold this book in your hands, knowing that it was read by our boy," sadly said the old woman, and carefully opened the title page, and to their surprise, they saw a shocking message that was addressed to them. The couple looked at each other in bewilderment, and then the owner of the apartment took a piece of paper in his hands and began to read softly. At the first lines, the couple wept. John took a few deep breaths and continued reading. The message written to Anthony read as follows. "My dearly beloved parents, these lines I address to you. I am madly glad that I was brought up by you. As such a mom and dad still need to be found in the whole world. I address all kind and affectionate words to you. I express all my gratitude only to you in the first place. And now I will come to the point. If you are reading this message, then I am no longer alive, Otherwise, I would have destroyed this message. The point is that I have committed an atrocity, but again, in order to save a little man, whose name is Anthony, like me. He is your grandson. That is my son, whom I have just recently learned about. But about this, you will tell you Sarah herself, who came to me for help. You can be sure that Anthony is my son. You will find the same mole as mine on my right leg, where the ankle is. Sarah hid everything from me, but that's not the point. The main thing is that I haven't hair, and so I will continue. The whole thing is that the child from birth has a disease, and to cure it requires surgery. Naturally, such finances I do not have, and Sarah, and even more so, especially since she lives alone for a long time since her grandmother died. And it is not easy for her in terms of finances, as there is nowhere to wait for help, and I did not help because I did not know that there is a son. Sarah found me and asked me for money for the child's operation. To get them in a short time is impossible, and the time, as they say, was ticking. That's why I decided to commit a crime. I won't give you all the details. Basically, I defrauded a very wealthy and important man. I blackmailed him out of a very large sum of money, which I gave to Sarah. And then I made the unbelievable mistake of blackmailing him again so that I could finance the baby's rehabilitation. That's when I realized I shouldn't have done it, but there was no turning back, and I became an unnecessary witness from that moment on. I was well aware that I was walking on a knife edge, but I had no choice in the situation. I'm very sorry for the way things turned out. I'm asking you to help Sarah because she has no one else but you and my son. I forgave her for the lie, as I continued to love her all these years. That's why I didn't have relationships with other girls. P.S. I love you a lot. Don't grieve for me. Little Anthony still needs you and you need him. I know you will get along great with your grandson and his mom, and may she be happy and find someone else in her life who will love her as I did. Don't tell her I'm gone. I don't want her to blame herself in the future. Let her think that I've gone to another city and I'm happy there. The stunned parents sat in silence and digested the message they had read. None of them expected that they would find this note and that it would contain so much information. The first to break the silence was Lucy, who said through sobs, "He asked me for money and I said only in the bank." From then on, I began to notice that my son wasn't doing well. And then when he was beaten, I also realized that not everything is not smooth with our boy. I'm such a bad mother for not recognizing my own son's troubles. I'm going to blame myself for the rest of my life for not being able to help our boy in time. Honey, stop beating yourself up. It's not your fault. I'm more interested in why Sarah hid the fact that she was pregnant with Anthony's baby. It's not fair to the boy's father. We've wasted so much time, and we could have been babysitting. That makes the kid about 5 years old. We need to talk to this girl right away. Lucy took the message from her husband's hands and gently pressed it to her chest. Tears were continuously streaming down the elderly woman's cheeks. She brought the note to her eyes and began to reread it. John looked anxiously at his spouse at this moment. The man worried that his wife might become ill with her heart. With the first impressions from reading the shocking message passed, Lucy looked at her spouse puzzled and said with horror that she did not have Sarah's number. The man coughed and reminded his wife that she had gone to visit the girl to talk to her grandmother. The older woman thought for a moment and then slapped her forehead with the words, "That's right, I was talking to her grandmother. You see how old age has crept up on us unnoticed. But wait, it's uncomfortable without warning. Why are you talking nonsense again? You're Anthony the grandmother and I'm the grandfather. We'll buy candy, fruit, a cool radio-controlled car and come visit. Let's do it today. It's not too late. By the way, we need to talk to you about Anthony telling Sarah not to say anything about being dead. Do you think that's right?" John said. "I think it's right to tell, but I think it's right to keep the reason about the money out of it. She'll really feel bad that Anthony died for the sake of her son. Although I do think a true parent should go to any lengths to save their child." The couple soon packed up and went shopping. The couple bought all kinds of sweets, different fruits, and a big radio-controlled racing car. And after a while, the elderly people stood near the front door trying to hear the children's voice. And then the door across the hall opened, and an old woman angrily exclaimed, "Why are you eavesdropping here? Are you trying to rob me? You crooks. At such a respectable age, and yet you still want to steal. I'll call the police." "No law enforcement. We're here to visit Sarah and Anthony." We just wanted to know if they were home or not, John said in an agitated voice. Ah, well, only if they were. They're home. They just got home from daycare. When Anthony comes home from daycare, the whole neighborhood knows it. The same kid announces the news to the whole neighborhood and gesticulates desperately with his hands, the neighbor said with a chuckle. The couple looked at each other after these words of the stranger. They understood each other without words. After all, their son was returning from kindergarten in the same way. He talked loudly and always gesticulated, and now their grandson was carrying on the same tradition. The couple smiled between themselves, and John confidently pressed the doorbell. A minute or two later, they were answered by Sarah, who looked dumbfounded at the couple. The young woman hadn't expected them to come, so she didn't know what to say. Lucy had fully expected such a reaction, so she spoke first. "Hello, Sarah. Would you let us in? I think we have a lot to talk about. It's uncomfortable on the doorstep, and it's drafty in here, and Anthony's still a little... He and I had a big fight, and I told him not to come to me anymore because I have another young man. Your son freaked out and wished me luck. And then I found out sometime later that I was in an interesting position. I wanted to abort the pregnancy. Why become a single mother at this age? But I was persuaded by my grandmother not to do it. She said that the first time it is better to give birth, it is advised in gynecologists. In the end, I kept the baby and I don't regret it at all. After that, I wanted to inform Anthony about my interesting position, but Julia sent me a photo with him where she wrote that they were happy. And these pictures were not few, and it took me angry that the guy so quickly switched to another girl after the fight. And I decided that I would raise the child by my own efforts, especially with me next to my grandmother, who always came to my rescue. When Anthony was born, I immediately decided to name him after my dad because he looks very much like him, and you can see it yourself. Even a mole in the same place. At this point, the young woman paused and looked lovingly at her son, who continued to explore the car. Sarah then turned to her guest and continued her narrative. Anthony was born weak and had a serious illness. We coped with his grandmother together, and then she was gone and all the burdens fell on my shoulders. I will tell you right away that it was very difficult financially, but to turn to your son for money did not allow pride. And then the child got worse. He was hospitalized and told to look for money. And where could I get such a large sum of money? That's when I decided to find your son. I was afraid to turn to you because I thought that you would not believe me. You would say that I had a child and claim rights. The young woman paused and looked at the couple, who listened to her attentively. Sarah shifted her gaze to the child and continued speaking again. Your son promised to help me, though he called me stupid for believing Julia. I'm the one who only recently found out that he's been living alone all this time. He tried to start relationships with girls, but it didn't work out. And I didn't even try to find my soulmate because I was busy taking care of the baby. Anthony brought money. I asked him where he got such a large sum, but the guy was joking. I saw him about 3 times, and then he just disappeared. No calls, no visits, and I thought he didn't need us anymore. And I even hoped that we could start a family with him, but I was wrong. That's basically the whole story. After Sarah's story, all the adults were silent. Only the delighted voice of the child, who was playing with the car, was heard. Lucy looked attentively and at the same time fondly at her grandson. And only after a while the guest uttered, "You really are a silly girl. You should have initially told about this Lita to your chosen one, and not to make your own incomprehensible conclusions. I can't hide that Anthony, after the breakup with you after some time, tried to build a relationship with her, but it didn't work out. But now it's too late to talk about it, because the past can't be returned, as well as Anthony." After this phrase, the landlady froze. She looked perplexedly at Lucy, and then asked to explain what "no Anthony" meant. And the old woman smiled sadly and tears came to her eyes. She said quietly that only part of the message had been spoken. Sarah was still staring at her interlocutor incomprehensibly. Lucy saw that she had shocked the girl, so she continued speaking softly. Anthony died at the hands of hooligans. As they say, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he loved you the whole time. He asked me and my grandfather to help you, and we'd love to do that because your little boy is part of our child. And we, like you, have no one else. We all need to stick together because we need to get Anthony back on his feet. I don't suppose you're opposed to that suggestion." Sarah covered her face with her hands and cried quietly. No one said anything else to the young woman. The couple realized that the landlady needed time to perceive the grief message. The girl tried to pull herself together, but her emotions were running high and she couldn't help herself and cried to tears. The boy looked fearfully at his mother and cried too. At that moment, Lucy got up and came to Sarah. She hugged her son's lover and quietly asked her to calm down so as not to scare her son. The girl nodded gratefully in response and hugged Anthony's mother as well. And then the young woman pronounced, "You are always welcome to come to us anytime, for you are Anthony's own grandparents, and I would only be grateful if we could be related to you. I would love to call you mom and dad, and I'm going to explain to my son who you are so he can see you as family. It is very wonderful that you have made this decision, because Anthony is in heaven and I am sure he is watching everything and is happy for us. And I would love to call you daughter, even though I lost a son, but in return the Lord gave me a daughter and a grandson." Sarah hugged John and the guest again and said, "Can I ask you just one thing? I want to go to Anthony's grave to talk to him. I would like to do it alone. You understand, don't you?" "Of course we understand. You have a lot to talk to Anthony about. But I want to add to you that our son wishes you nothing but happiness in the future. So you should try to promise him that." "I understand and I will do that. And please forgive me for everything. I'm to blame for a lot of things," Sarah said quietly. "But don't blame yourself. You are starting life with a new leaf, where you have a son and parents, and God willing in the future you will find a loved one, with whom you will give us a granddaughter too," replied Lucy affectionately and then called her grandson. As soon as the boy came, she said, "Hello, grandson. I am your grandmother, and next to me is your grandfather, and we will see each other often, and you will definitely tell us about your news in kindergarten. Your grandfather and I will be interested to know all about you." A few days later, Sarah went to the cemetery with John, and the grandmother stayed with little Anthony. As soon as the young woman found herself near the grave, she asked the older man to leave her alone. John did not hesitate to fulfill the girl's request. He stepped aside so as not to interfere with her communication with the deceased. The young woman carefully squatted down, laid a beautiful bouquet of artificial roses on the grave, and then gently wiped the photograph with the back of her hand and softly began to speak. "Hello, Anthony. This is not where I expected to meet you. I dreamed of being reunited, and you see how it turned out. You're now in the damp earth, and I'm coming to you. If things could be changed, I'd give anything for it, except our little boy. I'm glad you got to see him just a few times in this life. Now, by chance, we'll be in close contact with your parents, and that's to your credit and no one else's. Your message brought John and Lucy to me, and now our son will have grandparents. I was told by your mom that you wish me happiness, and for that I thank you so much. I here and now vow that I will definitely become a happy person and that you, looking at me and my son, rejoice for us. And one more thing, I promise you that I will never forget you, as I have a part of you growing up. I really hope you don't hold a grudge against me, but it's both of our fault that our paths have diverged, but it's too late to talk about it now. All I have to do is hold my head up proudly and go on my way, and I will. And now I will say goodbye to you and call your father. He is here with me too." After these words, the young woman called John and invited him to her son's grave. The elderly man also laid a bouquet of artificial flowers, bent down and kissed the photo on the monument, and only then spoke. "Hi, son. I want to thank you for your grandson. He is just like you, not only in appearance, but also in behavior. We have withheld only a part of your address, but it's better for you in heaven. And now your mother and I will visit you often if we can. And we will be sure to tell you about your son's achievements. I know very well that you hear me now and are happy that we have become one family. You know that I am not a great one for speeches, so I will say that you are forever in our hearts and we love you and will never forget you. And now it's time to return to the little mischievous boy, who has probably already fed his grandmother with his stories about everyday life in kindergarten. And one last thing. Thank you for the money. It really helped your son. You did what you thought was right. Sometimes in life you have to make tough decisions, and you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. That's all I have to say, so I'll see you next time." John turned to Sarah and politely offered to go home. The young woman nodded gratefully and hugged the older man tenderly, whispering, "Thank you, Dad, and I'll thank my mom at home. Now let's hurry up. because the wind is picking up outside. The two adults moved leisurely toward the exit from the cemetery. Each of them was thinking about something else. Sarah was glad that she could say everything she had on her mind at the grave, and the elderly man wanted to get home as soon as possible to play with his grandson. After a while, John and the girl arrived home, where they were met by Lucy, who had time to bake a duck with apples and boil semolina for the baby. Soon the adults set the table, sat little Anthony at the table in a place of honor, and began to celebrate the reunion. After everyone had eaten, then Sarah went to Lucy and hugged her tenderly, and then kissed her on the cheek and said, "You are the most wonderful mom in the world. Your son told me so. He was very proud of you, and from now on I will only address you as mom too. And also I want to become like you, because you are a very wise woman, and Anthony was not in vain proud of you and his father. And these are not made-up words your son told me. Thank you, Mom, for everything." Lucy had tears after these words, and she slightly audibly said, "I know that my son was a good man, and thank you too for your warm words. I really hope that you will bring up your boy also a worthy man in life. I love you, my daughter. And do not forget that you promised my son to be happy. We also want it with his father, and the promise must be fulfilled. We have such a motto in our family, so you will have to accept it. There is no other way." After that, the two women hugged each other and laughed happily. The head of the family came up to them and asked with bewilderment what he had missed so funny. Sarah, seeing the incomprehension of the owner of the apartment, laughed even more. Looking at her mother, little Anthony started laughing, and the rest of the adults followed.